Okay, so here's a question for you. Has anyone else ever started researching vampires, technically for the sake of the video, but then you just got actually really into them, and then you read Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire book, and then you watched the new show that's coming out, and you became really obsessed with it, and now that's all you've thought about or talked about to other people for the last 2 years or so, and now that season 3 is coming out, you feel like you're going to vibrate out of your skin? Anyone else? Or is that a more unique experience kind of thing? Either way, you are now stuck in my basement, and so this is going to be your problem too. So I've been doing a little bit of reading, and I read all of these, and now I'm going to tell you everything that happens in them, from vampires, obviously, to Replomoids, cartilage creatures, and Atlantis. And I wish that was the weirdest stuff that happens in these. Now, theoretically, we've got my conspiracy board here to help make things clearer. I don't know if that's actually going to help that much, but I just need you to lock in and stay with me, because we've got a lot of material to go through. I have limited myself to a single page of notes for each of these books, a tightly spaced page of notes, and obviously I've got lots of extra notes on them. And if you want to follow along, or you're trying to read this series, or if you just want to check in on what some of the books are without reading them, because I get that, I wish I could have done that, I will have this entire PDF linked in the description. I can't promise it won't make sense to anyone else except me. That's assuming it does make sense to me, which it kind of doesn't. But either way, that'll be linked in the description if you want to check that out. And for the record, this is the outfit that I would wear to the Vampire Lestat concert, except that I would have better shoes. Hang on. I would wear these boots, but they're really high heels, and if I'm wearing them, I'm gonna headbutt the duct that's directly above me, because must I remind you, we are in my basement. I also have a cool leather jacket, but that's too loud. These are the things that we sacrifice for the sake of cinematography. Okay, I think that is officially as much as I can possibly prepare you for what's about to happen, so let's get into it. Okay, it is time for our first entry into the Vampire Chronicles, Interview with the Vampire, which came out in 1979. Hopefully you can see with glare and everything, but we're going to be using this whiteboard to track where and when we are, and this board is going to become very relevant in every single later book. But we start out with 2 characters. An unnamed boy, who I'm going to be naming for the sake of my sanity, Daniel Malloy, and a vampire, Mr. Louis de Pointe-du-Lac. I am using emojis to represent our characters, and these emojis, I should clarify, are not necessarily how the characters are in the book. They're just kind of how the characters vibe to me. This is all just going to be very vibe-based, so I hope you're ready to deal with that. And Louis is here because it's time for him to tell his life story to Daniel, who's going to be interviewing him. The year is 1791, and we are just outside of New Orleans, where Louis de Pointe-du-Lac is 25 years old and running his family's plantation. Yes, he is a plantation owner who owns slaves, and that's never super dug into in this book, but the show does a really good job of adapting that, so go ahead and watch that if you want more clarity on that point. Louis has a brother named Paul who is highly religious, but Louis himself struggles with a lot of doubt when it comes to religion, so the two of them have a kind of contentious relationship, but this all comes to a head when Paul falls off of a roof, right? He falls to his death. I don't remember exactly what off of, but Louis blames himself. Louis is having a really bad time, so to get away from it all, he moves to New Orleans, he goes on a bender, he's drinking like crazy, he's spending the family's money, and he also has an encounter with a vampire who drinks his blood. This vampire, who we find out is named Lestat de Lioncourt, rocks up to Louis at his house and basically just asks him if he wants to become a vampire. He says it'll fix a lot of his problems, and Louis says yes. So as you can see, when people become vampires, they have fangs now. It's a visual sign. Now, pretty immediately, Louis is not having a good time being a vampire, and he really blames Lestat for this. He never really liked Lestat from the get-go, he never really got the chance to know him, but now that he is getting to know him, he finds him rather unpleasant. Here is a line about Lestat. Louis says that he was a sow's ear out of which nothing fine could be made, as boring as a mortal, as trivial and unhappy as a mortal. He chattered over the game, belittling my experience, utterly locked against the possibility of any experience of his own. By the morning, I realized that I was his complete superior and that I had been sadly cheated in having him for a teacher. He must guide me through the necessary lessons, if there were any more real lessons, and I must tolerate him in a frame of mind which was blasphemous to life itself. He summarizes, I felt cold towards him. So Louis and Lestat are not off to a great start from the get-go, at least from the version of the story that Louis is currently telling. Now, Louis is pretty certain that Lestat turned him because he was broke and needed money, so they both moved back into the plantation, and Lestat's dad comes to live with them. He's very old, he's on the verge of death most likely, and he just sucks. Neither of them like him. He's really mean to Lestat and just totally ungrateful. And eventually, Lestat asks Louis to kill his father, or basically just finish him off, which he does. The problem is they've been doing a lot of killing between Lestat's dad and also just eating every single night. They've killed a lot of people, and people are getting suspicious, especially the slaves who live on the plantation. The slaves think they're from the devil, which, for all intents and purposes, they are, so they weren't actually wrong about that. But the slaves light the house on fire, and then in order to make sure that there are no survivors who remember that there's sketchy stuff happening around these two, they kill all of the slaves and run away. What follows after this is yet another long period of time where these two are living together and absolutely hate it and argue constantly about the nature of vampire living. Lestat asks Louis, what do you think a vampire is? And Louis says, I don't pretend to know. You pretend to know. What is it? And Lestat doesn't have an answer for him. And so Louis says, I am confident I shall find vampires who have more in common with me than I have with you. Vampires who understand knowledge as I do, and have used their superior vampire nature to learn secrets of which you don't even dream. At this point, Lestat accuses Louis of still being in love with his mortal nature. So Louis really just hates Lestat, and he assumes that there are vampires out there who are less shallow and less kind of into killing and more into philosophy like Louis is. He assumes that there are vampires like that out there, whereas Lestat is firmly under the impression that he's kind of the best that there is. Louis' downward spiral continues, and he has a conversation with his ex-girlfriend, Babette, which turns into a confrontation and an argument in which she accuses him of being from the devil, which, again, for all intents and purposes, he is, but Louis doesn't like to hear that, so he goes on another bender where he feasts upon a 5-year-old orphan girl whose mother was a plague victim, and she's in there sitting with her mother's dead body, and Louis comes in there and drinks her very nearly to the point of death, and this little 5-year-old girl is Claudia. Now, Lestat shows up, and he knows that the best way that he can kind of piss Louis off is to turn Claudia. So now Claudia, a 5-year-old, might I remind you, is stuck in that body forever as a vampire. And you know what? To their credit, for a while they live as a happy family. Louis likes having someone to teach about philosophy and the way to live life, and he has a new best friend, and Lestat just likes having more vampires around. So for a while, they play happy family, but only for a while. Claudia is having a really good time being a vampire and killing people and stuff. She's having less of a good time with the fact that she's stuck in a 5-year-old's body forever. So she begins asking the two of them questions about like, hey, who was the one to turn me? Why did you do this to me? Those sorts of things. And she's getting really angry. And eventually Louis admits that I took your life, and he, as in Lestat, gave it back to you. Because Louis did almost drink her to death, and Lestat did bring her back. But Claudia says, and here it is, and I hate you both. At this point, Claudia is really mad, but also kind of resigned, because these two are the only vampires that she has, and she describes them at this point as locked together in hatred. She says to Louis, you loved me with your vampire nature. And Louis says, I love you now with my human nature, if I ever had it. And Claudia concludes, I hate you, I have no human nature. Out of all of the vampires we meet, Claudia, perhaps because of how young she was turned, kind of ends up being the scariest and most inhuman, because she just had no context for what life was like before being a vampire. And probably understandably, because he is technically the one that turned her, Lestat ends up catching the biggest part of her ire, and she starts a plot to kill him. At this point, Lestat is taking Louis to the theater, particularly Macbeth. He loves the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech, because it does speak to vampire nature pretty well. Lestat begins talking to a musician named Antoine. And Antoine kind of threatens the stability of this messed up little triangle that they have going, because Lestat is spending a lot of time with him because Lestat loves a musician, as you will come to learn. And he also begins threatening to make Antoine a vampire so that he will have a new and improved companion. Claudia is pushed to her limit, and she sets a trap for Lestat. She poisons 2 young boys who she knows that Lestat really likes to eat with laudanum, and she tricks Lestat into feeding off of them. This weakens him enough that she is able to kill him, and they throw his body into the bayou. So Lestat, he's finally gone. And Claudia is loving this. Now it's just the 2 of them. She's having a fine time. Louis, I would say less so. As much as he really liked to talk about how much he hated Lestat, he also says once he's gone, "I wanted to forget him, and yet it seemed I thought of him always. It was as if the empty nights were made for thinking of him. And sometimes I found myself so vividly aware of him, it was as if he had only just left the room and the ring of his voice was still there. A sickness rose in me more wretched than the anguish when I saw what my dreams were doing. I wanted him alive." So it was a very short-lived victory for the 2 of them. Again, Claudia is still pretty happy, but Louis is not having a good time. Turns out he was a little bit more attached to Lestat than he thought. Now, Louis and Claudia are planning a trip to Europe, but that's not going to be so easy, because who's back but Antoine? And he's a vampire now because he's been turned by Lestat. These 2 come after them. Louis sets the house and Lestat on fire, and the 2 of them manage to escape. Louis and Claudia ship off to Eastern Europe, where they're looking for other vampires, other than Lestat, who is really annoying. However, they don't find any. They find kind of zombie vampires, but not any rational, human-like vampires like they want to find. It is at this point that Louis is also realizing that Claudia is, definitely Lestat's daughter, too. She is aggressive, she likes to kill people far more than Louis does, and she's far more comfortable in her vampire nature than Louis ever was. But because they don't find anything in Eastern Europe, what's there to do but to move on to Paris? And honestly, all things considered, Paris is treating them pretty well. It's a nice city, it's very pretty. Claudia meets a doll maker who's willing, instead of making her baby dolls, to make her dolls of adult women, which is a little bit creepy, but also for her it makes sense because she's always been treated like a baby doll, especially by Louis. So through this doll maker, whose name is Madeline, she finds some kind of comfort. Louis is out on the town when he encounters a vampire who begins mimicking his every single move as if he's a mirror, and then that vampire invites him to the Théâtre des Vampires, the theater of vampires. Claudia and Louis go, where they find out that it's a theater that is literally run by vampires, and at the end of every single one of their shows, they do a sacrifice on stage. They kill a human being, but it works out because through the magic of theater, they make everyone assume that what's happening in front of them isn't real. And it is there that they meet Armand. Now, I need to make something clear. I love all of my vampires equally, except Tarquin Blackwood, you know who you are. However, Armand is especially special to me. Call me the devil's minion, because it's me, Daniel Malloy, and Armand all the way, baby. That's all. Anyway, Armand is the leader of the Paris Coven, which runs the Théâtre des Vampires, and Louis starts swooning over Armand pretty immediately, mostly for the sake that, compared to Lestat, Armand is much more willing to talk about his vampire nature in the very open philosophical way that Louis craves. Claudia, however, does not like Armand or the theater whatsoever because she's pretty afraid that Louis is going to abandon her for Armand, which is a valid fear. But Louis, for his part, is absolutely gone. He describes the way that he feels about Armand as not physical love, you must understand. I don't speak of that at all, though Armand was beautiful and simple, and no intimacy with him would ever have been repellent. I speak of another kind of love, which drew me to him completely, as the teacher which Lestat had never been. Knowledge would never be withheld by Armand, and I knew it. He gets to the point where he is so obsessed with Armand that he admits, now, after all these years, I could forgive Lestat for being nothing but an ordinary creature, who could not show me the uses of my powers, and yet still I longed for this, and could fall into it without resistance. Armand has the benefit of being a couple 100 years older than Lestat, certainly, but also Louis, and the two of them just find a lot of value in each other. Louis, because Armand is very wise and old and willing to talk about philosophy, and Armand, because Louis kind of seems to embody the spirit of the age that they're in. And if there's one thing that an old vampire struggles with, it is staying engaged in the time and space that they actually exist in, because timelessness does really weird things to your brain. Claudia is not stupid. She's like a 50-year-old woman at this point, even if she is in the body of a 5-year-old. So she realizes what's happening, and one day she brings home Madeline, her doll maker, and demands that Louis turn her. She says to him, "Don't you look away from me. I am sick at heart with your looking away, with your suffering. You understand nothing. Your evil is that you cannot be evil, and I must suffer for it. I tell you I will suffer no longer." So she demands that Madeline be turned, and Louis turns her. And for a while, the three of them, I don't have a thing for Madeline because I can only make so many things for so many characters, but the three of them, Armand not included, have a very happy little life that they build together. They become a little vampire gang. Armand warns Claudia and Madeline that they should probably get out of there from the Paris Coven, but they do not take his advice in time because Claudia, Louis, and Madeline are all kidnapped by the Coven. And who is there but Lestat de Lioncourt? Tell me who is surprised. But he is a little bit miffed because he only ever asked the Coven to capture Claudia, because Claudia is the only one that he really has any beef with, and he doesn't understand who Madeline is, but particularly why Louis is there, because he doesn't really hold much resentment towards Louis in particular. Louis tries to reason with the Coven. He says that he will return to New Orleans, he will be with Lestat if it means that Claudia can survive, but that is unfortunately not going to be the case. Claudia and Madeline are taken away, and they are put in a place where the sun will shine upon them and kill them, and they both die. And Louis is imprisoned. Armand breaks Louis out of his imprisonment, but then Louis realizes that Claudia and Madeline have been burned, so even though Lestat is begging for forgiveness, he's obviously not really in the mood to forgive. He plots to burn the theater down, and then does burn the entire theater down, killing all of the Coven members except for Armand and Lestat, who escapes. At this point, Louis and Armand are now companions, but kind of reluctantly so. Neither of them are having a very good time, and Louis begins to disassociate entirely. He says, "I might have loved him again," referring to Armand, "and desired again, and sought some semblance of mortal life, but now I have come to see that it was false. Even if Claudia had not died, even if I had not despised Armand for letting her die, it would have all turned out the same. Coming slowly to know evil or being catapulted into it was all the same. I wanted none of it, finally." So Louis is very much decided that this existence of being a vampire is just absolutely not worth it, but he also doesn't have the energy to actually end it. Armand and Louis travel around for a while, but they're drifting further and further apart in their relationship because neither of them really care about what's going on. And by the time they're in New Orleans in the early 20th century, Armand tells Louis that Lestat is actually alive, hoping to get a rise out of him. Louis goes to see Lestat and finds him just a shell of a vampire. He has not coped at all with the changing times and changing technology. He's hearing helicopters above him and he's scared of them. And he's just not even something that Louis can be angry about. And Louis just absolutely doesn't care about what's happening to Lestat, and so he leaves him there to more or less die. At this point, Armand has to be honest, and he tells Louis that their relationship is not working anymore. He had taken Louis into his life because he thought that he was the spirit of the age and that he might reinvigorate Armand's experience, and Armand has found him to just add absolutely nothing to his life. And Louis is mad because Armand helped to kill his daughter and also doesn't care about anything. Louis says to Armand, I wanted love and goodness in this, which is living death, I said. It was impossible from the beginning, because you cannot have love and goodness when you do what you know to be evil, what you know to be wrong. You can only have the desperate confusion and longing and chasing of phantom goodness in its human form. I knew the real answer to my quest before I ever reached Paris. I knew it when I first took a human life to feed my craving. It was my death, and yet I would not accept it. I could not accept it, because like all creatures, I don't wish to die. But it was all the same, all evil, all wrong, because no one in any guise could convince me of what I myself knew to be true, that I was damned in my own mind and soul. And then he says about Armand, you showed me the only thing that I could really hope to become, what depth of evil, what degree of coldness I would attain to end my pain. And now you see simply a mirror of yourself. They have nothing to add to each other's experiences. And so Armand leaves, and that brings us to the end of Louis' life story. Did you forget that Daniel Malloy was here? Yeah, he doesn't really contribute anything to the story, as it were. He just kind of says, and then what, to everything that Louis says. But it's at this point that Daniel Malloy becomes very relevant, because he hears everything that Louis just said about how terrible vampiric existence is, and you know what he says? Make me a vampire! I love you, Daniel Malloy. Daniel Malloy, God, you get it. You're so great. He says, make me a vampire. Louis says, what the hell, and attacks him. Daniel Malloy makes it out with his life, and he decides, you know what? I think I know just enough about this Lestat guy to go and track him down. And so he leaves to track Lestat down, and that brings us to the end of our first book, Interview with the Vampire. I'm not going to give all too much background information on the reception of these books because I'd lose my mind, but suffice it to say, Interview with the Vampire changed things in terms of the vampire genre. It was very well received. It is regarded as, like, literarily speaking, very good. That's not to say that the rest of the books aren't good. It's just this one is probably the most literary out of all of the books. But the next one is certainly quite a book. It is a very fun one. It is The Vampire Lestat, which came out in 1985, which is quite a few years after Interview with the Vampire. Lestat just cannot be repressed. By the way, technically speaking, if you are watching the show and you are trying to avoid any and all spoilers for season 3 and what may go on from there, this is probably where you should stop watching the video, because I'm going to be spoiling it because I'm telling you the plot of these books. Now, that being said, the show is doing things very differently from what I'm describing, so you kind of only have the most basic framework by continuing to watch this video. If you want, you can skip past the Vampire Lestat, because those are explicitly events that are probably going to be happening in season 2 of the show, and tune in like book 3 or 4. And then you can just be like, oh, this is all zany. I don't know. Do what you want, but I am going to be talking spoilers, technically. The year is now 1984. We are in New Orleans, and Lestat de Liancourt is hearing the rock music of the new age, and he's waking up. He's realized that this age that it now exists, the mid-80s, is actually pretty popping, and he could have a good time with it. So he comes out of his long vampiric slumber to figure out what's going on. In particular, he hears the music of a local band, Satan's Night Out, and he decides that he wants in on that. And so he joins their band and decides that he's going to become a rock star. Now, this is in part due to the publication of Interview with the Vampire, because Louis put that out, which was very much against the rules of being a vampire, which, generally involve not, publishing your entire life story and everything about being a vampire. And in their world, the book was published, and it's causing problems. So Lestat thinks that if he starts a rock band and publicly proclaims himself to be a vampire, that would understandably take some of the heat off of Louis. And if there's one thing about Lestat de Liancourt, it's that he loves Louis de Pontefract. But before Lestat begins his illustrious career as a rock musician, he has something that he needs to do. And that is to tell the audience his entire life story. It is the late 1700s, and Lestat de Liancourt is 21 years old, and he goes out to kill the local wolves that have been harassing the wildlife around his property. He brings his dogs with him, and although he is able to kill the wolves, all of his dogs die. He returns home and is nursed back to health by his mother. Hang on, I've lost her. Gabrielle. Lestat's family owns a chateau in rural France. However, they don't have any money. They have inherited this chateau, but their family is actually really poor comparatively. So although Lestat and Gabby technically have food and lodging, they are not doing particularly well. Also, the dad of the family, who was the guy who died in the plantation last book, really sucks. He's just a huge jerk, as are Lestat's older brothers. There was a whole thing where, as a kid, Lestat had tried to join a monastery because he was actually really into God at that point. However, his brothers and dad came and dragged him out of the monastery and then beat him a lot because they were mad at him for wanting to be a broke priest instead of a broke nobleman. There's also an incident where a theater troupe comes to town, a Commedia dell'arte theater troupe, and Lestat ends up getting to perform with them as Lelio, the lover boy character, and he's great. Everyone loves him, and the theater troupe offers that he can go with them to be a part of their theater troupe, and Lestat agrees. However, his dad and brothers find out about it, and they're not happy about that, and they send the theater troupe off and drag Lestat home, and once again beat him. Seeing how despondent Lestat is over no one in his family really getting him, Gabrielle decides to introduce him to a local tailor's son, Nicolas de l'Enfant, who is a musician who had spent some time in Paris, and Lestat and Nikki immediately hit it off. As they spend time in bars, drinking together and talking about philosophy, the two of them fall in love and discuss plans to move to Paris and pursue their dreams together. It's during this time when they're talking a lot about life and happiness and what it is for your life to have value that Lestat has a complete mental breakdown and realizes that he no longer believes in God. This breakdown involves him screaming for days at a time, just loudly screaming, which is such a classic Lestat breakdown. I love it. Now, the only problem with Lestat and Nikki's plan to go to Paris is that they have no money, and Gabrielle sees this, and she gives them the last of her savings so that they can go and live the life that she never got to live. So now, Nikki and Lestat are bound for Paris. In Paris, both Nikki and Lestat find jobs playing for a theater while Lestat performs, and they're doing pretty good. Lestat is definitely thriving. However, Nikki is severely and chronically depressed, just like Louis was. Lestat really knows how to pick them. And he's especially depressed because in comparison to Lestat, he thinks that he's not doing as well. Nikki says to him, "You have a light in you that's almost blinding, but in me there's only darkness. Sometimes I think it's like the darkness that infected you that night in the inn when you began to cry and tremble. You were so helpless, so unprepared for it. I try to keep that darkness from you because I need your light. I need it desperately, but you don't need the darkness." And Lestat says to him, "You're the mad one. If you could see yourself, hear your own voice, your music, which of course you play for yourself, you wouldn't see darkness, Nikki. You'd see an illumination that is all your own. Somber, yes, but light and beauty come together in you in 1,000 different patterns." The crux of Nikki's problem is that Lestat is shining so brightly and doing so well, and Nikki just thinks that he's lost his chance at finding the kind of happiness that Lestat seems to have in spades. Lestat feels everything really big. He says he can't help but crying or laughing whenever he feels the impulse. So as much as he felt despair when he realized that he didn't think God existed and he screamed for days, when he finds joy, when he finds something to be excited about, he also feels that to its absolute fullest extent. And Nikki just does not have those highs or lows to the extent that Lestat does. And he really struggles with that comparison. But soon that will not be the largest of their problems, because one night Lestat is stolen from his room by a vampire named Magnus. Magnus used to be involved with other vampires in other vampire covens, but he's now a weird sorcerer who lives alone in a tower. And his whole thing is that he really likes guys with blonde hair and blue eyes, which I don't think I said, but Lestat has blonde hair and blue eyes, and he's also the handsomest man to ever live, and that is exactly Magnus's type. And in his tower, he actually has a bunch of blonde-haired, blue-eyed guys because he's been looking for the perfect one, And it turns out that Lestat is the perfect one, which is a really unfortunate prize for him to win. Magnus tells Lestat to ask for vampirism because he wants it to be consenting, but when Lestat says no, he changes him anyway. So Magnus turns Lestat. Lestat is now a vampire, and what does Magnus do but immediately throw himself into the fire after telling Lestat where his fortune is and ordering him to scatter his ashes once he had burnt himself so that he can't come back. So now Magnus is dead, and Lestat is alone as a vampire, and he does not take to this particularly well. He kills Magnus's servant as his very first kill. He kills Magnus's servant and then goes out to test his various abilities and goes on his first hunt. The problem is that now that he's a vampire, he knows that if he goes back to his old theater, people are going to realize something's up because he's a vampire, you know? He looks different, he acts different, etc. He has different abilities, most certainly. And so he doesn't want to go back to his theater, but he still wants to support them and also Nikki, who's not happy that Lestat simply vanished. So he sends money back to the theater, and he sends money and gifts to Nikki, including a Stradivarius violin, which is a very fancy kind of violin. Nikki is becoming more and more resentful that Lestat is gone and is trying to provoke him to tell him where he is, which makes sense. And Lestat just kind of watches from the distance, and at one point he does buy the theater for the theater company so that they no longer have to rent it. He's being very generous because, as I think I mentioned, Magnus left him an entire fortune, so now Lestat just never has to worry about money again for the rest of his life. Eventually, Lestat does return to the theater, where they're very excited to see him, and they push him out on stage, where, I have this written in my notes, he starts doing backflips, he screams really loudly, and then someone shoots him, because they're really scared of what he's doing up there, and everyone in the audience is screaming. Everyone is scared because Lestat's doing some crazy on stage, and then he runs away because he doesn't want them to see him as what he is now. Through all of this, Lestat has also been sending money and letters back to Gabrielle at home, and she decides that with her dying breath, because she has consumption, she's going to go to Paris so that she can die with Lestat, and Lestat finances this journey. Gabrielle shows up, she's dying, and what does Lestat do? He turns her into a vampire so that she can live forever. She was actually willingly turned, she did ask him for it. However, now that she's a vampire, something really interesting happens, which is that the two of them start a romantic relationship with his mom. Listen, I won't say that this is the weirdest and most incestuous thing that happens in the Vampire Chronicles, but it is startling and pretty gross. But the two of them start both a friendship, partnership, romantic and platonic and familial, and they're roaming the streets together. Gabrielle's whole thing is that now that she has the strength and willpower to do it, she's gonna dress like a man. Every day she cuts her hair off, because it's a whole thing with vampires where if you cut your hair off, it grows back by the next time you wake up, by the next night. And so she's actually really upset about that because she was turned with her hair long, and so her hair is going to be long forever. She actually wishes it were short because she likes to dress as a boy and pretend to be a boy. And there's some gender things happening there that, frankly, it's a little bit too much to get into here. But anyway, Gabby likes dressing as a boy, and the two of them roam the streets together. Now, they have noticed that as they roam around Paris and the surrounding areas, they're being followed by something that they refer to as the Presence. It is other vampires, it's the Paris Coven. And the Paris Coven attacks them, they get away. However, in order to make it so that Lestat and Gabby have to come talk to them, they kidnap Nikki, and so now the two of them are going to be meeting with the Coven. And the Coven is, of course, led by my darling Armand. And Armand, I think, thought that this conversation was going to go differently than it did, because he berates the two of them because they're not acting like vampires should. They're not following the code. And, okay, so the satanic coven that Armand belongs to, that would eventually become the Théâtre des Vampires, their whole cosmology and philosophy is that God and Satan are real, and they believe in God and want to serve him, but in order to serve God, because they're creatures of evil, they must serve Satan. So by killing people as vampires, they are proving that evil is real and thus good is real. I don't know if that made sense. But either way, they are killing people, and they think that that is for God, even as they serve Satan. They understand themselves to be reprehensible creatures of evil. And Gabby and Lestat are not living that way. They're like dressing nicely and not living in holes in the ground. And Armand and the rest of the coven just cannot get on board with that. But Lestat has his own philosophy. He says to them, "Think of it, Armand. Why should death lurk in the shadows? Why should death wait at the gate? There is no bedchamber, no ballroom that I cannot enter. Death in the glow of the hearth. Death on tiptoe in the corridor, that is what I am. Speak to me of the dark gifts, I use them. I am gentleman death in silk and lace, come to put out the candles. The canker in the heart of the rose." Lestat's basically like, you can be evil. You can be evil. And you can also be sexy. Have you thought of that? And the other vampires are like, whoa. A lot of them do, end their lives. They throw themselves into the fire because they can't handle the kind of facts that Lestat is spitting. Lestat and Gabby and Nikki are allowed to leave the coven. However, Nikki now knows that Lestat is a vampire. Nikki begs to be turned, and Lestat turns him, but he realizes that Nikki was so severely depressed and just hollowed out by the life he'd led that even now that he's turned, there's nothing for the dark gift to enhance. There's nothing for vampirism to enhance. He is just effectively empty, which is just so sad. Anyway, so Lestat and Gabby are living their lives. The coven comes to them and asks Lestat in particular, what do we do with ourselves? And Lestat gives them the best advice he possibly could, which is to start a theater company. What else are you gonna do with an entire lifetime? Now, Nikki, who is now a vampire, joins the coven and is kind of the leader in getting their shows started. However, because Nikki is kind of a messed up guy, the shows that they're doing are really dark and macabre and involve killing people, which Lestat is obviously pretty horrified by. Armand comes to Lestat and asks him to join the theater company, to which he says no, because he is way above his theater kid days. But in order to try and convince Lestat to stay with Armand, it is time for Armand's life story, or at least a condensed version of it. Armand, hang on, used to be named Andre, and yes, I just wrote Europe. It's the 1490s. They go to a lot of different places, but it is the end of the 15th century, and Armand, or as he was known then, Andre, is living on the Russian steppes, and he is kidnapped by slavers and taken to Venice, where he is sold to... I'm not going to get his card out right now because it's not super relevant. He's sold to Marius, who is a much older vampire, and Marius will disappear for long periods of time and not tell Armand, Andre, Amadeo, as he calls him. He won't tell Armand where he's going when he disappears for these long periods of time. However, he does turn Armand when he's very young, when he's like 16, I think it is. And so now Armand and Marius are vampires, although he knows that Marius isn't telling him everything, and they're living pretty happily, except when a satanic cult of vampires, much like the Paris Coven, comes and burns down Marius's house, kills him as far as Armand is concerned, and Armand is taken by these vampires and is taught the rules of vampirism, which are as follows. The first rule: each coven must have its leader, and only he might order the workings of the dark trick. So turning a mortal into a vampire can only be done by the coven leader. Number 2, the dark gifts must never be given to the crippled, the maimed, or to children, cough, cough, Claudia, or to those who cannot, even without the dark powers, survive on their own. Rule 3, never should an old vampire work this magic, lest the blood of the fledgling be too strong. That's a whole thing. The older you are, the stronger your blood is, and the more powers you get. So if you're an old vampire like Marius, for example, who's a couple thousand years old, you shouldn't turn a fledgling because that fledgling will have more power than they know what to do with. Rule 4 is that no vampire may ever destroy another vampire except the Coven Master. Rule 5 is that no vampire shall ever reveal his true nature to a mortal and allow that mortal to live. And so that is how Armand, who is now a vampire, got made the leader of the Paris Coven. He was inducted into the Satan cult, and now he's there. Armand tells Lestat that he will never be fully happy with any vampiric companion that he makes, i.e. Gabrielle, Nikki, and Louis. So long as you are only finding company in vampires that are your fledglings, you're never really going to be happy, which is very astute, except that Lestat does not care. He does not allow Armand to travel with him, even though Armand has asked, and he leaves. He does, however, take from Armand's life story the fact that he really wants to meet Marius, because he feels like Marius might be able to teach him something if he was able to make Armand. And so he leaves a message behind for Marius saying that he, Lestat, wants to get in contact with him, and then they leave Paris. At this point, Lestat and Gabrielle travel just kind of all around the world together for the next 10 years. Lestat is receiving letters that say that his father is doing progressively worse, also that all his brothers have died, and now his father is old and living in New Orleans. He also has a letter come in talking about the theater company. He's getting updates about that, which is how he learns that Nikki has lost his mind. Armand cut his hands off in order to keep him from harming himself. However, Nikki ended his life anyway. So Nicholas L'Enfant is dead, which is really sad, and Lestat's not doing particularly well. And it is, of course, at this point that his mother, Gabrielle, decides it's time to leave him. Gabrielle's whole thing is not just that she dresses as a man, but also she just kind of wants nothing to do with human society. She's over it. She's lived long enough that she just wants nothing to do with it. And so her thing is going to be disappearing into the wilderness. She says, "When the world of man collapses in ruin, beauty will take over. The trees shall grow again where there were streets. The flowers will again cover the meadow that is now a dank field of hovels. That shall be the purpose of the satanic master, to see the wild grass and the dense forest cover up all trace of the once great cities until nothing remains." So she says that if I'm going to live forever, then that means I'm going to get to see the end of civilization, and I don't really want anything to do with it until that happens. So she goes feral and vanishes off into the wilderness and says, like, she'll stop in sometimes, but for the most part, don't talk to me, son of mine. Considering that he's not doing particularly well, Lestat takes this as his opportunity to bury himself in the ground. This is a thing that vampires do relatively often in these books. It's kind of accepted that if you're going to live forever, there are just going to be time periods you want to skip over. You're going to get really tired, and when you do that, you bury yourself, say it with me, in the ground. And so Lestat does this, but after not particularly long time, he is awakened by none other than Marius, who has noticed, hang on, I keep losing Marius apparently because he pisses me off and I don't like him. Anyway, Lestat is awakened by Marius, who has seen all of Lestat's letters that he's been leaving behind and all of the messages he's been leaving behind so that Marius could track him. Marius has tracked him, and he wakes him up and he takes him to the island near Greece that he lives on. And it is on this island that Lestat is brought into the shrine that Marius has underneath his house, where we find Akasha and Enkiel. And at first, Lestat thinks that Akasha and Enkiel are statues because their skin is entirely white and they do not move. However, they are real vampires. In fact, they are the very first vampires, the king and queen of the damned from ancient Egypt. And they're really scary and really cool, and Marius doesn't really understand what's happening with them, but he refers to them as those who must be kept. Yes, those who must be kept. I keep saying they who must be kept, but it's those who must be kept. You know what really sucks? You know, in Armand's life story a couple minutes ago, how Marius would disappear for days at a time and not tell him where he was going? He was visiting those who must be kept, and for whatever reason, he wouldn't tell Armand about them, about Mother and Father Vampire, about the Queen of the Damned. He did not tell Armand about that, but as soon as Lestat waltzes in, he tells him about them. It makes me mad. Lestat, in his ever-brilliant wisdom, decides to go up and kiss Akasha, the 6,000-year-old vampire. Yeah, he goes and kisses her, which, surprisingly enough, does not get him killed. But anyway, it is time for yet another life story. I don't have a non-vampiric version of Marius, but the point still remains that Marius was a Roman living in Britain in the 1st century, back in the days when those were the thing. And he was captured by a cult of druids who put him into a tree trunk where there was this really messed up looking vampiric creature, and that vampiric creature turned him into a vampire. And it was this whole thing where they needed a new vampire sitting in a tree to make sacrifices to, and Marius was supposed to be that. But then Marius escaped after having been turned into a vampire, and now he's a vampire. So Marius is out in the world, and he learns about Akasha and Enkiel in statue form, who are currently being kept in Egypt by some vampiric elders. He also learns that not long ago, the two of them were put out in the sun by the person that was supposed to be caring for them, and because Akasha is connected to all vampires, being the first vampire, because you have a connection to those you've made, because she was put out in the sun, every other vampire also feels the burn of the sun, and all of the younger vampires were eliminated, and all of the older vampires got seriously messed up. So suffice it to say, this is not something that they want happening again. It is at this point that Lestat learns a very truncated version of Akasha and Enkiel's story for how they turned into a vampire, but you're going to hear the whole story in way more detail later on, so it's really not worth me going over here. But basically, they were king and queen in ancient Egypt, and demons turned them into vampires. That's kind of the gist of it. And Marius is summoned to go and get Akasha and Enkiel from that elder, and he has become the new guardian of the two of them, trying to make sure that nothing happens to them, because if so, all of vampire kind is going to be in danger. Marius gives Lestat some very pertinent advice about being a vampire and how you need to have other vampires around you in order to not go insane. And then later that night when he's left alone, Lestat plays the violin for Akasha, who should be up here and is not. He plays the violin for Akasha, and he plays so beautifully that she wakes up, kind of, which they can do if they are seriously moved by something. They can move a little bit, and then they return to their statue position. So Akasha wakes up because Lestat's playing is so beautiful, and he's so handsome, and they feed off of each other. And if you remember what I said about how old vampires have stronger blood that can give you more powers, so Lestat is drinking directly from the first vampire, so he has the blood of Akasha in him now, which is very relevant. And also she's drinking from him, so he's getting some of her memories, he's getting some of hers. They have a bond now. And Keel sees all of this, and is not particularly happy about this because that's his wife, and she's obviously a little bit in love with Lestat. So he tries to kill Lestat. He also moves and almost kills Lestat, and Lestat is very narrowly rescued by Marius. And Marius is not particularly happy about this whole thing because he did tell Lestat to leave Akasha and Enkiel alone. However, he's not mad for long because it's Lestat, and everybody loves Lestat so much and will always forgive him for anything that he does. Not that he doesn't deserve it, he is pretty good. Anyway, he does send Lestat away on his own and tells him to go and, live one normal mortal life. So where does Lestat go? He goes to New Orleans, where he finds Louis. And he kind of recounts the events of Interview with the Vampire, but you get the sense that Louis' version of the story was not like an outright lie. He's allowed to have whatever opinions he wants. Lestat was always Lestat, but the version of him that Louis describes is perhaps more villainous than the actual Lestat. He describes it as having fallen fatally in love with Louis. He says that he had Nicky's grim intensity, his rebelliousness, his tortured capacity to believe and not to believe, and finally to despair. Yet Louis gained a hold over me far more powerful than Nicholas ever had. Even in his cruelest moments, Louis touched the tenderness in me, seducing me with his staggering dependence, his infatuation with my every gesture and every spoken word. So not only was Lestat more smitten with Louis than Louis implies, but also I think Louis was more smitten with Lestat. He says that I loved him plain and simple, and it was out of the desperation to keep him, to bind him closer to me at the most precarious of moments, that I committed the most selfish and impulsive act of my entire life. among the living dead. It was the crime that was to be my undoing, the creation with Louis and for Louis of Claudia. He definitely expresses some regret over the creation of Claudia, and he says of Louis' account, Interview with the Vampire, he told the tale as he believed it. And he admits that I betrayed him when I created him, just as I betrayed Claudia. Lestat is a really complicated guy, and although he does do a lot of messed up stuff, one of the main themes of these books is the fact that once you're a vampire, traditional morality kind of goes out the window. Like, why does it matter that Lestat and Gabrielle, his mother, had a romantic weird thing when they're also killing people? And they're doing like this, once killing people is what you have to do every single day just to live, the morality of everything kind of is called into question. He also explains that when he was brought to Paris to condemn Claudia and what led to her death, he was actually just there for healing blood, the healing blood of Armand, which he knew was more powerful than any other blood because he had been burnt by Louis and he wanted to be healed. However, he is duped, and there is a very funny moment where Armand fully pushes Lestat out of a tower. And of course, after the events of Interview with the Vampire, Armand comes to Lestat to talk about things, where Lestat then pushes Armand off of a roof. As much as these two are like endgame, love them forever, there's something about Lestat and Armand's relationship, because they are both the pettiest vampires that they know, that's, especially in the book, and maybe they'll do this in the show, it's irresistible. I love the two of them. They can do no wrong in my eyes. Now that brings us back to the present. Lestat's life story is officially over. He has become a huge rock star. He and Satan's Night Out have music videos, they're on the radio, they're everywhere, and a lot of people have taken notice, and a lot of vampires have taken notice. Of course, people don't realize that Lestat is actually a vampire because he's just saying that he's a vampire, and who's gonna believe that he's actually a vampire? But, especially from vampire kind, he's receiving a lot of threats as he prepares for his biggest concert ever, which is going to be on Halloween night in San Francisco. And it is leading up to this concert that Lestat and Louis also meet up and have a conversation and actually kind of talk it out. Louis is obviously telling Lestat not to go on stage and says, "Let the film and the books do what you want, but protect yourself." And Lestat says, "It's a very tempting, beautiful one. I am going on stage. I am going to be Lelio again, the way I never was in Paris. I will be the Vampire Lestat for all to see. A symbol, an outcast, a freak of nature, something loved, something despised, and all of those things. I tell you, I can't give it up. I can't miss it. And quite frankly, I am not the least afraid." So he's gonna do this concert no matter who tells him not to, which is really bold because as soon as the show begins, it goes pretty well. However, it is crashed by vampires who start attacking people. But Louis and Lestat escape together. Gabrielle pulls up in a rescue car to come and save them from the concert as vampires around them start just bursting into flames spontaneously. Marius shows up to inform them that Lestat's little music videos have ended up getting heard by Akasha, and she's awake now, and just as she awoke once when Lestat was playing the violin, she's back and she's gonna get him. And that is where the Vampire Lestat ends. Okay, full transparency, I've just realized it took me 2 full hours to film those first 2 books, and if I continue at that rate, I'm gonna be here until 2 a.m., and that's not an option. So from here on out, we're going faster. Our next book is 1988's Queen of the Damned, which picks up in the same place as we were before. So that is with Lestat and Louis escaping the concert along with Gabrielle. Now, Marius has been lurking around. This is kind of like right before the concert. This book is everywhere. It goes everywhere. We're going to meet a lot of new people, so just stay with me. Marius sees declarations against Lestat in a bar, and then he goes back to Those Who Must Be Kept and finds out that Enkeel is just a hollowed out version of what he once was. He's like just a transparent plastic material, and when Enkeel falls over, he shatters because Akasha has drained all of his blood, and now Enkeel is dead. He also realizes that Akasha is gone. She's no longer there, and it turns out that she is awake, as was discovered at the end of the last book when Marius announced it. But she calls Marius powerless to stop her, and then drops him into a crevasse of ice, which is under her home. So now Marius is trapped in the ground as he deserves. Now, across the next couple of chapters, everyone keeps seeing visions of the twins, Mekare and Maharet. They are these red-headed twins. Everyone's seeing visions of them. No one is really sure why. This includes a 14-year-old vampire named Baby Jenks, who is riding on a motorcycle. She was turned by a vampire named Killer, and she has joined the Fang Gang. Baby Jenks returns home and she kills her mom and dad, and then she meets a vampire in a coven house who tells her that all of the other coven houses are burning, and then Baby Jenks and this vampire are burned to death and they're dead now. So vampires are having dreams about the twins and also are spontaneously combusting. Marius calls on Santino, who's actually... I didn't realize how messed up that was. Santino is the guy who was leading the satanic coven that burnt down Marius's house in the first place. But he calls Santino and also Pandora to come and get him out of the crevasse that he's stuck in. Let me just say something about Pandora. Other than my dear darling Armand, Pandora is by far my favorite vampire other than Armand. She's incredible. I love Pandora. No one can take that away from me. I'm not talking about her book in this because I'm already talking about 13 books and I'm losing my mind. But Pandora is fabulous. I love her. She's such an excellent character, and she knows how to put Marius in his place, which is deeply important. So they go and rescue Marius. Now, time for the Devil's Minion chapter. You remember Daniel Malloy, the interviewer from the first book? He's back, and they tell us it's been 6 months since Daniel left Night Island, and he's wandering around and thinking about Armand. It turns out that after the interview, when he went to look for Lestat after the events of the first book, Armand found him instead and then imprisoned him for a couple of days. How romantic. And after he imprisoned him, he let him go and then continued to stalk him around the country for 4 years. I know it sounds insane, but I know it sounds insane, but like what constitutes romance in these books? Anyway, this is the wrong book. I've been waving around the wrong book. Please hold. So this is Daniel thinking about Armand. He says, Daniel stared at the creature before him, this thing that looked human and sounded human, but was not. There was a horrid shift in his consciousness. He saw this being like a great insect, a monstrous evil predator who had devoured millions of human lives, and yet he loved this thing. He loved its smooth white skin, its great dark brown eyes. He loved it not because it looked like a gentle, thoughtful young man, but because it was ghastly and awful and loathsome and beautiful at the same time. He loved it the way people love evil, because it thrills them to the core of their souls. I love them because Daniel doesn't love Armand like he would love a human. He loves him for the very sake of his monstrousness. And that is what Louis could not see in Armand. He couldn't accept this monstrous side of Armand, but Daniel sees him. By the way, Daniel is like a drug addict and not having a good time. So Armand does get Daniel addicted to his vampire blood, because for humans, vampire blood is like a crazy drug, and Daniel is a drug addict. And so Armand gets Daniel addicted to his blood, and they have like a kind of on and again and off again toxic thing. Armand buys Daniel a whole island that's called Night Island. It's in Florida. Very cool, very sexy, but Daniel really likes to play hard to get. He's also mad because Daniel desperately wants to be turned into a vampire, and Armand refuses. He's never turned anyone into a vampire, and he loves Daniel too much to do that. So Armand refuses. They have this thing for a while, and then just before the concert, Daniel is on death's door just because he's totally messed up his body with drugs, and so Armand finally turns him, and we have Daniel Malloy the vampire. Now, our next chapter is talking about Cayman. Cayman is actually from the time of Akasha and Enkiel. And he has lost a lot of his memories because he's been alive for so long. However, he remembers things such as a curse. He says, "Damn you, sovereign, damn you to hell for what you did to all of us." Akasha, and he says another curse came back to him far stronger than his own. It had come a year after the awful moment when he had assaulted the 2 women. A curse screamed within the courtyard. "Let the spirits witness, for theirs is the knowledge of the future, both what will be and what I will. You are the queen of the damned, that's what you are. Evil is your only destiny, but at your greatest hour it is I who will defeat you. Look well into my face, it is I who will bring you down." So he's having a memory that he can't quite put together, but it is of the twins, and it involves Akasha and somebody saying that Akasha is the queen of the damned, evil is her only destiny. Cool. Jesse Reeves receives a letter from Maharet, who's one of the redheaded twins that everyone's been having dreams about, saying not to attend the concert, but it's time for her life story. Jesse Reeves had a teenaged mom who died in a car accident, so she was an orphan, but she was collected from the hospital by Maharet, who introduced her to the Great Family, which, because Maharet is a vampire, she doesn't have fangs because I couldn't fit them on Maekari and it felt wrong to put fangs on one twin and not the other. Maharet is a vampire, and she's been living for so long that she's assembled this family of her descendants and people associated with them that she kind of keeps track of and keeps together over the years. So Jesse is introduced to the Great Family who raise her. Jesse can see ghosts, and Maharet tells her that's perfectly normal, which it is in this world. A lot of people just have psychic capabilities. Jesse at one point goes to stay at Maharet's compound. Oh my god, I forgot some of these characters were here. Wow. Jesse goes to stay at Maharet's compound for a while and really likes it, and there's a vampire there also named Mile. She doesn't really know that they're vampires, but she knows something's weird because they're only awake at night. Whatever. Another vampire there named Mile. Mile drinks from her, and so Maharet sends her away to protect her from Male. Male? I don't know. Anyway, Aaron Leitner, I don't think I have a tag for him, but a guy named Aaron Leitner then approaches Jesse Reeves, and he says that he's from the Talamasca. The Talamasca is an organization that's just been watching and tracking all of these supernatural creatures for years. And so Aaron Leitner invites her to the Talamasca, and although Maharet is kind of reluctant to let her join, gonna go live her life, there's a lot of psychic people in the Talamasca, so at least she won't be alone there. David Talbot, who's an elder in the Talamasca, sends Jesse to New Orleans to investigate the events of Interview with the Vampire, which she does, but there she sees Claudia's ghost, and then falls ill and has to recover. But now that's the end of Jesse's life story. And she's just received a letter from Maharet saying not to go to the Vampire Lestat's concert, but she's gonna because she wants to know what's going on. Everyone gathers together for Lestat's show. That includes Cayman, that includes Louis, that includes Daniel and Armand. And Cayman, sees Jesse and recalls when he assaulted Maharet and Maekari at the demand of Akasha. So he's slowly piecing together his memories. We'll go over the exact events of that later, but he's starting to get his memories back, especially when he sees Jesse, who is technically a long-term descendant of Maharet. The show begins, and it's just so great. In the flashing lights, this is Jesse, saw the Vampire Lestat leap high into the air and come down with a palpable sound on the boards, his voice rising again without benefit of the mic to fill the auditorium, his guitar players prancing around him like imps. The blood ran in tiny rivulets down his white face, as if from Christ's crown of thorns, his long blonde hair flying out as he turned full circle, his hands ripping at his shirt, tearing it open down his chest, the black tie loose and falling. His pale crystalline blue eyes were glazed and shot with blood as he screamed the unimportant lyrics. I can't wait for season 3 of the show! Ah! Anyway, so Jesse trying to confirm that it is Lestat. Also, vampires sweat blood in this universe. Should have said that, but that's why Lestat's covered in blood. And she wants to see if Lestat is legit, and so she goes and jumps on stage to see if his skin feels weird, which it does. She's dragged off stage. A vampire identifies her as Talamasca, and her neck is broken because she's a Talamasca agent, and a lot of vampires don't like the Talamasca agents. The show stops, as happened at the end of last book. Vampires are burning, and Jesse is taken back to the compound in Sonoma, which we'll change that over in a second, where she is turned into a vampire. Now, a funny detail about that is that particularly in Jesse's case, They make sure to mention that her hair is trimmed, like she's given a haircut before she's turned, and I also believe they shave her legs and like do her eyebrows for her, because the whole thing with vampires is your hair doesn't grow, and that includes body hair and stuff. So when they're given the chance, a lot of the times these vampires, before they turn their fledgling, will like go and get them groomed and like give them a fresh wax before they turn them. Which in the case of Jessie, where her neck was literally broken as she was laying there getting a full wax, is pretty funny. I just bumped the vent. Now, Lestat is not doing so well because Akasha flies up to him, because vampires can fly, and kidnaps him. Hang on. Lestat has been kidnapped, and Akasha's not going to kill him, because as it turns out, Lestat is her perfect, precious baby. She says, "You were born for me, my prince. You were tried and perfected. And in those first years when you went into your mother's bedchamber and brought her into the world of the undead, it was but a prefigurement of your waking me. I am your true mother, the mother who will never abandon you, and I have died and been reborn too." Rude of her to target Lestat's very obvious mommy issues. It's a little bit rude of her, but it does work. So Lestat is with Akasha now, and everyone else is gathering at the compound in Sonoma where Jessie has been turned. And you know what that means now that everyone's together? It means that they're going to all sit together for what I'm going to refer to as conference table time. I got confetti poppers just so that I could do the bit about conference table time, because this is a device that Anne is going to use a lot, which is just to get all of her major characters together around a conference table and figure out their problems together. It's a device that gets used a lot. So they all gather together for conference table time to discuss what's going on and to figure out if they can kill Akasha. Because part of their concern is that if they kill Akasha, all of them are going to die because they are all interconnected to her. And I believe Gabrielle specifically says that we should waste this bitch. I love Gabrielle. I know Anne didn't, but I love her. Akasha is now flying around the world with Lestat, and she announces that it is her plan to kill like 90% of the male population. Yeah, she's gonna keep like a couple of men alive, and of course she gets to keep Lestat around. But she wants to create a new utopia, and in order to do that, she thinks that she should kill all men because women will be able to rebuild the world better. Lestat is like, this doesn't seem right. Why do you want me to do this killing? In the name of what morality will all this be done? And she says, in the name of my morality. I am the reason, the justification, the right by which it is done. So she's got a bit of a god complex, which, to be fair, she is 6,000 years old and kind of a god. But anyway, oh my god, we haven't been in Jessie's life story for a while. Ignore this. Hang on. It's time, back in conference table land, for another life story. And that is the life story of the twins. Now the twins, okay, so the twins were alive at the same time that Akasha was, and they were living on Mount Carmel, and they were witches. Their culture had funerary cannibalism, which means eating people after they're dead as a sign of respect, and funerary cannibalism is an actual thing. But I won't info dump about that because that's not what this video is about. Anyway, they are funerary cannibals, and Akasha and Enkil in Egypt really do not like the fact that they are funerary cannibals because they think that cannibalism is wrong. Mekare in particular becomes very close to a spirit named Amel, and Amel is obsessed with blood. Surprise, surprise. The two of them, Mekare and Maharet, are caught eating their mother's brain and heart after she dies. They didn't kill her, but she dies and they're trying to eat that. And they are taken before court, which is really messed up. Akasha asks them a bunch of questions, and she's used the excuse of the whole cannibalism thing to drag them there, but really she just had a bunch of questions about the spirit world that she wanted answered, and she's on a power trip. So she brings them in and asks them a bunch of questions, and eventually Amel attacks her as a spirit, which she obviously doesn't like. And as a punishment for Amel having attacked Akasha, Mekare and Maharet are assaulted by Cayman in view of the full court. It's really messed up. They are allowed to go home after this, and within 9 months, Maharet gives birth to a child, which is how she has a whole bloodline thing. And a couple of years later, they come back to the court and they learn that Amel, the spirit, has stayed in the court of Akasha and Enkiel and driven everyone mad, especially Akasha and Enkiel. And there are nobles plotting to kill the king and queen because they've gone crazy and they're claiming that there are spirits, which there are, but not everyone knows that. They are stabbed by their courtiers, and then through the wounds in their body, Amel enters into them, and they become the first vampires. Namely, Akasha becomes the first vampire, and Enkiel is also turned. And Akasha blames the twins for this, because the spirit only showed up when they showed up, and so she rips out Mekare's tongue and rips out Maharet's eyes, which is why I've used these particular emojis, and I've realized it's kind of dark in retrospect. They have their tongues and eyes removed, and then Cayman feels really bad about it, because he's kind of terrible, but not actually that bad of a person. He's also been made into a vampire at this point, and so he turns Mekare and Maharet into vampires. And then with the help of Cayman, Mekare and Maharet start turning other vampires and lead kind of a revolution against Akasha and her vampires. This doesn't work out particularly well, and Mekare and Maharet are shipped off to opposite ends of the earth, where Maharet formed the Great Family, and Mekare disappeared into the wilderness and no one is sure where she is. And that's the end of the twins' life story. We are now back in the present day, and Akasha and Lestat arrive. So she announces her plan, and she says that this will go down as one of the bloodiest centuries of the human race. What revolutions do you speak of? She says that the screams of the hungry are deafening, yet unheard by the rich who cavort in technological citadels. Disease runs rampant among the starving of whole continents, while the sick in palatial hospitals spend the wealth of the world on cosmetic refinements and the promise of eternal life through pills and vials. Did ever the cries of the dying ring so thickly in the ears of those of us who can hear them? Has ever more blood been shed? And you know what? She is kind of right about that. However, the solution of killing most of humans, I don't know. They kind of have this whole philosophical debate that Lestat also joins in, and he says, history is a litany of injustice, no one denies it. But when has a simple solution ever been anything but evil? Only in complexity do we find answers. Through complexity, men struggle towards fairness. It is slow and clumsy, but it is the only way. Simplicity demands too great a sacrifice. It always has. The philosophy of this book is killer. I really like what Anne is saying here. Because Akasha's right, like, there's a lot of messed up stuff in the world, but as Lestat said, any solution that is as simple as hers, which is to kill all men, obviously is not going to work. A simple solution will never fully work. While they're sitting around the conference table, because it is still conference table time, Mekare shows up. She's not dead. She was in the wilderness, but she's back now. And she is locked in on Akasha. Obviously, she can't talk. She doesn't have a tongue, but she's locked in. She shoves Akasha into a giant plate glass window, and the glass falls down and a huge chunk of it decapitates Akasha, which is bad because she's the queen of the damned, if you'll remember, and if we waste this bitch, we might all die. However, Marius has the great idea that they need to do funerary cannibalism. It all comes back to funerary cannibalism. And so, yeah, Mekare eats Akasha's brain and Maharet eats her heart. There's this whole thing where like the brain and heart have different qualities. If you eat them, you get certain things from the person. Anyway, they then announce that Mekare is now the queen of the damned. Whatever the sacred core of vampirism is now inside of Mekare. After this, Mekare and Maharet go away, and everyone else goes to Night Island. You remember that island that Armand bought Daniel? Yeah, they all go and hang out at Night Island. Marius tells Lestat that this whole thing was not his fault, which is arguable. But anyway, Lestat goes to New Orleans and finds Louis, because obviously he's not hanging out with other vampires because he's miserable. Louis says that Claudia's ghost wasn't real, despite what Jesse said. You know, it's debatable. Lestat flies Louis then to the Talamasca Mother House in London, which is against the new rules that they've set up, but Lestat's always been a bit of a rule breaker. And there, they meet David Talbot. And Lestat says that he'll turn David Talbot if he wants him to, which is kind of against the rules because David Talbot is old. But David Talbot refuses the offer to turn him, and so he gives David his phone number to call when he changes his mind. Lestat tells David to open a file on him, and Lestat laughs as Louis admonishes him for breaking the rules. And they fly away happily ever after, and that is the end of Queen of the Damned. Now, if we are to say what of these books in this series are, like, good, I like Pandora and the Vampire Armand after this. But, like, technically speaking, these first three books are probably the most, like, actual books out of all of the books. So, you know, I want everyone to read The Vampire Armand because I really like him, but to be fair, if there was a place to stop before things started getting weirder, this is probably the place to stop. But I need to clear all of this away because it's time for the next book. All right, our next one is 1992's Tale of the Body Thief. Now you may have noticed that this is on a different backing paper than this and it's a different font. This is my way of showing that this kind of belongs to a different series. I would say that the first 3 are kind of their own little sub-series, and then we get other sub-series breaking out of this one. This is just like, I don't know, the Queen of the Damned series, you could probably call it, because it's all kind of leading up to that. This series is, I describe it as Lestat f***s around and finds out. It's a very particular genre, but by God does he. Alright, Tale of the Body Thief opens with Lestat de Lioncourt. Baby, he's living it up in Miami in the 90s. He opens this book up by saying, "The Vampire Lestat here. I have a story to tell you. It's about something that happened to me," which is one of my favorite openings for a book ever. It's insane. Why would you open a book like that? He goes on to say, "I am not a pragmatist, understand. I have a keen and merciless conscience. I could have been a nice guy, maybe at times I am, but always I am a man of action. Grief is a waste, and so is fear, and action is what you will get here as soon as I get through this introduction." I love Lestat. Anyway, Lestat is having a lot of unfortunate dreams about Claudia, who's still very haunted by her death. And he also is wearing fake tan now. Because he has Akasha's blood in him, he's really pale. And so in order to blend into Miami in the 90s, he wears fake tan, which I think is pretty funny. But as much as it is fun to be in Miami in the 90s, he's also just not really having a good time. He's kind of despondent. I said in my notes, despite being hot, Lestat is not doing so hot, which I think is fair. He stalks a murderer and kills him because he has this whole thing now where he only wants to kill evildoers, just like Marius does and all of the other vampires do. However, he stalks and kills this murderer, and then he also goes and kills the murderer's intended victim, which kind of takes away from the whole thing. A weird mortal, like a mortal person who's just acting really bizarre, runs up to Lestat and drops an envelope containing a short story, which is The Thing on the Doorstep by H.P. Lovecraft. Now, this short story just so happens to be about, like, changing bodies with something. The book is called The Tale of the Body Thief. Despite what a happy ending we had at the end of Queen of the Damned, the vampires have scattered. They're kind of like cats. They're not really good at being social. And the only person that Lestat is kind of currently talking to is David Talbot, who's over in England. And so he flies over to David Talbot all the time. Hang on, I'm knocking stuff over. And Lestat tries to convince David to take the blood. David does not. And Lestat is in such a state of distress that he goes to the Gobi Desert. There's tape stuck to my board. Hang on. Here we go. Lestat flies to the Gobi Desert and goes out into the middle of the desert where there's absolutely no cover and flies into the sun to die. However, he wakes up realizing that he has actually dug himself into the sand to protect himself from the sun, and he is not actually dead, and he's able to fly back to England where he's nursed back to health by David Talbot. And at this point, he's been burnt to a crisp, and so when he recovers, he's actually golden tan and no longer needs to wear self-tanner. So, good for him, I guess. While he's hanging out with David, David reminisces on a trip to Rio, which, I'm not changing this, but it would be Rio in like the 1950s. Ish. David falls in love with a young boy. He does that a lot. I don't like him. Anyway, falls in love with a boy named Carlos, and Carlos's mother doesn't want him to go on a hunting expedition with David, even though they're going on a hunting expedition, and when they do, she sends spirits after them. When David leaves Carlos in Rio, he goes back home and the spirits follow him, and in order to get rid of the spirits, he has to get in contact with the Talamasca. And the Talamasca helps him get the spirits under control. And after that, he actually goes back to Rio to study with Carlos's mom, which is just going to be a really awkward kind of a dinner time. The two of them talk about philosophy, Lestat and David, back in the present day. And then Lestat leaves and goes back to Paris, actually. And while he's there, he's given The Eyes of the Mummy by another stranger, which is another short story, like in an envelope. Stranger comes up and drops it for him. This is another short story about changing bodies. We are not being subtle. Oh my god, I'm so out of breath. So at this point, Lestat goes to Paris, and he gets given a copy of the VHSs of Vice Versa and All of Me, which are both movies about body switching. I'm a little disappointed Freaky Friday didn't make it into the mix. And I hope that if they adapted this in the show that Freaky Friday ends up on that list, because it feels really appropriate in my opinion. So Lestat calls David to Paris to meet up with him and try and put the pieces together, where David's like, all of this stuff is about body changing. Lestat realizes that a body thief is talking to him, and he's kind of intrigued by this because he's like, what if I became human for a little while? Wouldn't that be sick? And pretty unanimously, everyone is like, no. David's like, hey, don't do that. Lestat goes and talks to Louis, and Louis expressly tells him absolutely not to switch bodies with someone, because not only will Lestat be human then, but someone else is going to be a really powerful vampire, and that's probably not a great idea. Anyway, Lestat does it anyway, where he meets Raglan James. Oh, you'll love to hate him. So he meets Raglan James. Raglan James is a former Talamasca operative who got kicked out of the Talamasca for being a kleptomaniac. He just kept stealing stuff, and Lestat's like, yeah, that's the guy I want to trust with my body. And Raglan James tells Lestat that they're gonna switch bodies, so Lestat can be human and Raglan can be a vampire. But the reason that they'll switch back is because Lestat's gonna give him $10 million. And he'll only give him $10 million once the switch is back and complete. And that is how Lestat has assurance that Raglan James won't screw him over. Sure, I think they end up doing like $20 million actually, which Lestat's really bad at making deals now that I look at it, but they agree on a one-day switch. They're going to switch for one day, and they're going to do so in Georgetown, Virginia. They agree to that one-day switch. David tells Lestat not to do it. Louis has told Lestat not to do this, but he goes anyway. So Lestat gets to the house in Georgetown, and he's like, I'm gonna be smart about this. I'm gonna hide money for myself. I'm gonna hide, like, money in multiple places so that if something goes wrong, I still know where my money is. He also sees a dog, and that dog doesn't bark at him, and Lestat is immediately like, I love this dog is my best friend, that dog is named Mojo, and nothing bad happens to the dog, and I do love that. He expressly says that this dog has nothing to do with the story, really, he just likes it. They do the body switch, and Lestat is... he's not doing great, exactly. He's really disoriented. He doesn't feel good when he wakes up in a human body, obviously, because being human doesn't feel good. Anyway, he has to piss. He has to learn how to pee again, and he just ends up covered in it. And there's also, hang on. So he thinks about the fact that he's hungry, and that means he's gonna have to eat. And it says, but if you eat, you know what'll happen? You'll have to go back in that bathroom again, or some bathroom, and relieve yourself of all that digested food. The thought almost made me gag. In fact, I grew so nauseated even picturing human excrement coming from my body that for a moment I thought I would indeed vomit. Lestat is so scared of bodily functions that he thinks he's gonna vomit. That's probably the most realistic part of this book, to be honest, if I went 200 years without, yeah. Anyway, once Lestat gets his wits about him, he realizes that RJ took everything. Like, he took the keys to the house, he took Lestat's wallet, he took all of the money that Lestat had hidden. He took the car keys to the car he was supposed to leave, and the car. And he also took, like, the furniture from the house that Lestat was supposed to be living in for a day. So Lestat has pretty much nothing, but he's hungry and he doesn't know what to do, so he takes Mojo with him and he goes to a restaurant. Now, at that restaurant, he has to beg for food, but Mojo helps him get the food because Mojo's really cute, etc., etc. And Lestat starts talking up a cute waitress, and that cute waitress invites him home. And he assaults her, like they start having sex and then he pushes it too far, and it's really genuinely disturbing. And of all the things Lestat's done, this one's pretty bad, but Lestat gets kicked out and he does apologize and he does realize what's wrong. He's just really struggling with, like, having human instincts again. But after that, he realizes he can send himself money, so he does that. But then he also realizes that the whole plan... They had to switch bodies back because Lestat was the only one who could initiate the transfer of the money to Raglan James. But the problem is that as long as... Oh my god, I was supposed to switch them, hang on. The problem is that so long as Raglan James is in Lestat's body, he has Lestat's money. The 20 million, when it reverts back to Lestat after their set time window, is gonna revert back to Raglan James, who is Lestat right now. So that's like a whole thing. Anyway, Lestat then passes out due to pneumonia, because it turns out that the body that Raglan James was in, which by the way was not his original body, was actually the body of someone who was actively dying of pneumonia. So not only is Lestat not as broke anymore, but still pretty broke, homeless, friendless, jobless, etc., he's also dying of pneumonia. He goes to a hospital, and there he meets a nurse named Gretchen. He immediately falls in love with Gretchen. Over these next 2 books, you'll know Lestat just falls in love with a lot of women. This nurse, Gretchen, who's also a nun technically, takes Lestat home because there's not room at the hospital. He's like haunted by Claudia during this time of sickness, but he recovers, and then he and Gretchen get it on. She's this whole thing where it's like, before I go and give my life up, I want to experience whatever. I don't know why Lestat's the person you're like, yeah, Lestat calls his bank and confirms that he is not, in fact, Lestat. Well, that Lestat is not him. Anyway, he gets the bank details mostly worked out, and Raglan James is not going to be able to use his money. Gretchen then leaves for South America for her mission, and Lestat flies to New Orleans, and I think my favorite, most human part is that while he's flying to New Orleans, he gets trashed on gin and tonics on the plane. So, we're back in New Orleans now, and, Lestat wants to go and talk to Louis. Because, you know, Louis is the love of his life, etc. Lestat does not manage to charm Louis. Louis is pretty done. Lestat says, Louis, you can't refuse me. I need help. And Louis says, but I can, and I have. Lestat is struggling with the fact that no one wants to talk to him right now. Even Marius, all of his other vampire friends, because he's messed up. He really messed up with this one, and Louis says, goodbye, Lestat. Perhaps the others will come to you in time when they feel you've paid enough. Lestat needs to get put down like this more often, because everyone told him not to do this. Anyway, RJ is just on a killing rampage. Raglan James is on a killing rampage. They realize Marius is pissed at him, and so David and Lestat get back together, because at this point, David and Lestat, they're all each other have. No one else is talking to Lestat right now, which is totally fair. And they track Raglan James down to a cruise. A cruise is a pretty good place to be as a vampire, to be honest, because you're constantly moving to new places and there's old people you can eat. David has to teach Lestat telepathy because he never learned telepathy as a human being because he was a vampire and vampires naturally have telepathy. So Lestat has to learn telepathy and how to, like, protect his mind. And they set up this whole plan involving guns and stuff to get RJ. The gist is that Lestat reclaims his body, and he's back in his body, but he passes out because it's the morning when this whole thing happens, and he wakes up, and both RJ and David are gone. He now flies to go and see Gretchen because he promised he would come back and show her his powers, and he goes to the jungle to find Gretchen, and she sees him, and she is scared. I think understandably by what she faces. She's really scared, and she doesn't believe him, and then she gets so scared that she gets the stigmata, which is like the wounds of Christ. So she gets the stigmata and Lestat leaves, so he's given her her religious miracle, I guess. So Lestat meets up with David in Miami, and David is acting kind of weird, but Lestat looks over this because David has finally decided that he wants to become a vampire, which is the one thing that Lestat has been asking for because he doesn't want to lose David. And so he drinks his blood. But as he's drinking his blood, he realizes that that's not David, that's Raglan James! When they did the whole body switch thing, Raglan James took David's body instead of the one that Lestat had been in. So Lestat gets pissed off and throws RJ, who's in David's body, into the wall, wounding his brain, meaning that he's dead. Effectively, he's dead. David Talbot is in a sexy new body, because the body had pneumonia when Lestat got it, but he's actually, it's just a nice body, and David was really old, and now he's in a sexy young body, and he's actually having a great time. Now Lestat is like, okay, cool, that's great. So he goes back to New Orleans, and he's doing some renovation stuff, and he also then goes on an apology tour, is the way I phrased it. So Lestat goes around and apologizes to all of the people that he pissed off, namely Louis. That's kind of the big one. But then he's like, you know what? I want David to be a vampire, and that's gonna happen whether or not he wants it. And so he hunts David Talbot down and turns him into a vampire. Now, this book just has Lestat doing a lot of things that are like dubious consent-wise, and this is one of them. However, afterwards, David does admit that he actually did want to be turned into a vampire. He was just kind of like too shy to ask for it ever. So he's actually grateful that Lestat turned him. So Lestat, in the end, then realizes that this chance of being human was his last chance to redeem himself. And he's just beyond redemption. And so he apologizes to Claudia into the open air, and that's the end of that. Tale of the Body Thief done. Alright, so our next one is also taking place in this Lestat around and finds out series, and that is 1995's Memnoch the Devil. I'm holding two pieces of paper. Memnoch the Devil has a reputation for being kind of one of the more oddball ones in this series. But if I'm being fully honest with you, it's in like my top 6 probably. Like I did like Memnoch the Devil. Hot take possibly. But Memnoch the Devil takes us to New York in the 90s, where Lestat is meeting up with his best friend, David Talbot. David has been making the most of his vampire life. He's been hanging out with Maharet and learning a bunch of stuff about other vampires. However, Lestat has been being weird once again. He's stalking this guy named Roger and subsequently his daughter named Dora. Roger is a criminal. He's like a gangster. And Dora is his televangelist daughter. Very similar to Gretchen from the last one. She's got a religious soul and she's so good at music and stuff and blah-de-blah-de-blah, and Lestat's kind of in love with her, whatever, but he's also kind of in love with Roger. Anyway, he's been stalking these two mortal people and he really likes them. But however, he also does think he's being followed. He's seeing weird things in hotels and the earth is opening up under him, and that's concerning to him. So Lestat tells David about this, and then he goes after Roger, who's the gangster he's been stalking, and finds his secret room of treasure, where there's a big statue, and it's like this obsidian statue, black marble or whatever, and it's of the devil, and Lestat's like, that looks really weird. That doesn't seem right. But Roger comes in, and so he kills Roger, finally, after stalking him for like 6 months. He kills Roger and gets rid of the body. And then he goes to a bar where who shows up at the bar but Roger? It's Roger's ghost, and Roger's ghost is like, I don't know why I'm here, but I know that you killed me. And Lestat's like, I did kill you. The main point of Roger being there is that he wants Lestat to take care of Dora. Dora had a tough life growing up, but she has stopped accepting help from Roger because she knows that he's a criminal, which he is. So she's stopped accepting donations from him and any of the artifacts or anything that he has. She won't take it anymore. And Roger's, I think I've been saying David. Anyway, Roger's main point is that he wants Lestat to provide Dora with a miracle, something that will like propel her ministry forward. It's time for Roger's life story. Now, I need you to be aware of the fact that this takes up like probably 1/5 of the book. It's not a not insubstantial part of this book, and it's not relevant. It doesn't matter, it never comes up again. Roger had a weird relationship with a captain, and there was a medieval manuscript by Wynkyn de Wilde, and it fully doesn't matter. He killed Dora's mom. It's fine, it doesn't matter, and I'm skipping past it. Anyway, he sees Dora as the chance to like start the cult that he never got to start. Either way, I should never have even written that out. I'm not telling you Roger's life story. Go read it for yourself if you really care. Roger then dissolves, and as Lestat falls asleep that night, or morning, he sees a man in the room with him, which is really scary. And he reports all this back to David. He goes to New Orleans to visit Mojo, who's staying with someone in New Orleans, but also to visit Dora, Roger's daughter, at the convent that she lives at. It is there at the convent that who shows up but Memnoch the Devil? That is actual the devil from the Bible. He's here, and he talks to Lestat. He describes Memnoch's appearance as a man stood in the corner, a simple man. Not particularly tall or beautiful like Roger, or flashy like me, not even very young, not even very old, just a man. A rather nice-looking man, with arms folded and one foot crossed in front of the other. So this ordinary man is Memnoch the Devil. And Memnoch's whole thing is he's like, Lestat, come to hell. Come see hell, because I need help there, and I've been waiting for a very, very special boy to come along and help me out with hell. You're the only vampire that can do it, because Lestat is so special. He's so special. And Lestat's response to this is crying. He says, I rolled over on my face and tucked my arm under my head and started crying like a child. I was worn and miserable, and I loved crying. I couldn't do anything else. You and me both, girl. So Lestat cries a bunch, and once again, he talks to friends. He actually talks to David and Armand, and it's very cute. There's a moment where he, like, ruffles Armand's hair. They're besties now. They have a whole conversation where they're like, we should probably hate each other, but we don't. So he talks to them, and they're like, don't go to hell, Lestat. Don't go to actual hell. And he's like, I think I'm gonna do it anyway, much like Tale of the Body Thief. It's time for them to go to heaven first before they get to hell. It's very, like, inverse inferno. So they're in heaven first, and they go to heaven, and it's really nice, allegedly. It says, the sound swelled and enveloped us, and indeed it was like laughter, waves upon waves of shimmering and lucid laughter, only it was canorous, and though all those who laughed also sang canticles in full voice at the same time. So it's like a huge big city, it's beautiful, and Lestat loves it. He also sees Jesus, actual Jesus, and Jesus says to Lestat, you would never be my adversary, would you? Not you, Lestat. No, not you. And Lestat is like, that's actual Jesus. Holy guacamole. But anyway, Memnoch takes him away. It is time for Memnoch's life story. So we go back to the beginning of time when Memnoch was an angel, because he was there before creation, etc., etc. And they see the first human beings, and of course the first thing that Lestat notices is that the woman has huge breasts. Just massive, massive tracts of land. And he keeps mentioning them, he mentions it a lot. Lestat, never change, baby. So Memnoch then walks Lestat through the 13 revelations of evolution. The first being inorganic molecules becoming organic, so organic molecules. The second being molecules becoming cells. The third, death and decay. The fourth is color, so like flowers bloomed and color existed. The fifth is encephalization, which is the development of brains. The sixth is faces. The seventh is animals on land. Eighth is feathered wings. The ninth is mammals. The 10th is upright apes. 11th is modern man. 12 is females, because Anne Rice makes specific mention that females are even more perfecter than men. And then number 13 is people being hot. That is the 13th revelation of evolution, is that people can be hot. Hey, evolutionary scientists, chime in. Is that actually how it went? Anyway, Memnoch has watched all of this happen, and he's not, like, super thrilled about how it's been going, because he's realized that death is a thing, and that these people that look so much like him, that have faces like him, are also dying. And he doesn't think that's right, and God's like, no, it's fine. However, angels then notice that humans have souls, and then God sends Memnoch to Earth to kind of, like, get his questions answered a little bit. He says, Memnoch, my accuser, said God, before you come into heaven and you begin your diatribe, go back down to the earth and study all you have seen thoroughly and with respect. By this I mean humankind, so that when you come to me, you have given yourself every chance to understand and behold all that I have done. So God sends Memnoch back to Earth, basically like, go answer your own questions and then come back. So Memnoch goes down and acquires a human body, and within human society, he finds an outcast woman who no one's really talking to, and the two of them sleep together, and Memnoch is like, wow, this is what it's all about. Joy and pleasure and human connection. This is actually what it's all about. But, God's not happy about that, so he gets locked out of heaven, deciding to make the best of this, because he's, he believes he's mortal now. He believes that he might also die. He goes around and teaches humans everything that he can, as much philosophy. It is at this point that Memnoch goes back up to heaven and is allowed to plead humanity's case. And he believes that humans, once they are educated, once they are taught about God, they're capable of really, really beautiful things, no matter who they are. He doesn't believe that any of them are inherently evil. And so God says, okay, go down to Sheol, where all of the souls are being kept, and find me I think it was 10, find me 10 souls that can be brought up to heaven, and that are good enough to be brought up to heaven. And Memnoch goes down there, And he finds 1,000,000 souls that are ready to go to heaven. Like, actually 1,000,000. And so they storm back up to heaven, and God is like, cool, they can all come into heaven. And Memnoch's like, wait, but this was only 1,000,000. All of them are capable of redemption. And God's response to that, he's like, I think human souls are just, on an individual level, kind of unimportant, and it's nice to have them in heaven, but if I have to, like, preach to every single one of them, I don't really know if that's worth it. And Memnoch's like, that's not really cool. I'm going to be absolutely clear. This is not really any Christian or Catholic theology. This is all Anne Rice. So Memnoch is cast out for having said all of these things. And after a while, say like a couple thousand years, we get to Jerusalem in 33 AD, when Memnoch meets Jesus. As in, like, he's God made flesh, just as Memnoch had said that God should be. He was like, if you become flesh like I was, you'll realize what human life is all about. And so God did that by becoming Jesus. Now, the problem is that Memnoch realizes he's doing the experiment wrong, because Jesus, according to this worldview, knew that he was divine the entire time. He knew that he wasn't mortal. He knew that he was going to live forever. And thus, the things that God is glorifying, things like suffering, things like death and impermanence, obviously these aren't things that really matter to him, because he knows that it will all be redeemed. And Memnoch believes that the human experience is doing all of the things that humans do, but not necessarily knowing that you are to be redeemed. And so he accuses God of doing the experiment entirely wrong, and God is basically like, well, I didn't want to do it like that. So he doesn't, which is, yeah, okay. And then Memnoch takes Lestat to 33 AD Jerusalem, where Jesus is being crucified. And Jesus calls Lestat up to him and has him drink his blood while carrying the cross. And then, oh God, this is so weird. So Christ then has the veil moment with Veronica, where he wipes his bloody face on the veil and it receives an imprint of his face. And he leans over to Lestat and is like, hey, take this thing and smuggle it out. I guess they're just in on it now. Lestat smuggles Veronica's veil away. God says, since you care more for these lost souls than for your God, let your lot be to collect them. Let Sheol be your kingdom, gather them there by the millions, and tutor them for the light. So, God says, okay, if you love those souls so much, why don't you go and fix them? And so Memnoch goes down and opens up hell. He describes hell as, hell is where I straighten things out that he made wrong. Hell is where I reintroduce a frame of mind that might have existed had suffering never destroyed it. Hell is where I teach men and women that they can be better than he is. By this book's logic, hell is a place where souls go to recover. It is where Memnoch confronts them with everything that they've done wrong and provides them with avenues to do better in the future, and thus be redeemed and be able to go to heaven. And Lestat is immediately kind of like, I like the sound of that. That actually sounds pretty good. Maybe I will help you run hell. And Memnoch's like, great, let's go. And Lestat's like, yeah, let's go to hell. So they go to hell, and Lestat, because he's in hell, is then hit with the ghosts of everyone that he's ever wronged. And Lestat hates accountability. So when he gets hit with everything he's ever done wrong to all the people he's ever done wrong, he regrets it immediately and flies out of hell and escapes. They try and get the veil, and they also rip out one of his eyes. It's a whole thing. Anyway, he's missing an eye, but he makes it out of hell, and he's back in New York, where he left Dora, David, and Armand. They're gone. Hang on. There's parts of this book where if I read them to you, I would get demonetized pretty instantly, and this is one of them. So Lestat comes out of hell and more or less recovers and tells them his story, and he shows them the veil. And especially Armand and Dora, who are both very religious, freak out when they see the veil, because it's the veil of Veronica. Pretty big deal. And Dora is like, this is the perfect chance for me to start my cult. So she takes it out onto the balcony on the streets of New York, reveals the veil, and everyone's like, wow, it's the veil! And Armand is like, I know what'll make this moment perfect. If I fly into the sun and explode. So Armand flies into the sun and explodes so that everyone can see it, and they're like, wow, it's a big miracle, Armand exploded. Anyway, David and Lestat, a couple days later, are walking around and looking at Dora's new cult that she's formed. And then they go to New Orleans, to an orphanage that's there, where Maharet is there. She has received a letter from Memnoch, and that letter contains Lestat's intact living eyeball, just because it does. And the note says, "To my prince, my thanks to you for a job perfectly done. With love, Memnoch the Devil." Whatever Lestat did was apparently what Memnoch was looking for, and Lestat, he loses his mind over this. He can't handle everything he's seen, so he is chained up in the basement for everyone else's safety. They do put his eye back in, so he has 2 eyes again. And so Lestat is kind of comatose, and David writes his story into the book, which is Memnoch the Devil. And that was Memnoch the Devil. I like the theology that we get to in this one. It is kind of missing, you might say, a story, but I suppose that's really just one person's opinion against the other. When I show you the title of the next book, which is from 1998, you might be a little bit confused, because this is the Vampire Armand. And if you will recall, Armand just ended his life by flying into the sun. But I raise you the point, what if he hadn't? So Armand is not dead. And we start out this book at the end of the book. So this isn't going to make any sense to you, but Armand and David are talking in New Orleans after the events of this book, and David says that Armand should come and visit Sybil and Benji, and then he says that Armand should tell him his life story for the sake of Sybil and Benji. We will meet Sybil and Benji later on, don't worry about it. Armand is from Russia, and he is an icon painter. And he says, "I look at my hands. I think of the phrase, 'not made by human hands.' I know what this means, even though every time I ever heard the phrase said with emotion, it had to do with what had come from my hands." Oh, I love you, Armand. So he's an icon painter, and he's really, really good, to the point where people say, like, his works are not made by human hands. They are divinely created, despite the fact that, obviously, he was the one that created them. Armand is taken as a slave, and we come to him in Constantinople, where he's a slave boy. He's then sold to Venice, where he's taken to a brothel, where he refuses to do anything, including eat, and is beaten for that. But he's saved from that by Marius, and Marius calls him Amadeo, which is a name that means beloved by God. And when Marius first sees him, he can't help but think that Marius isn't on the board. He calls Marius Jesus. He calls him Christ. And Marius says, "I am not the Christ, my child, but one who comes with his own salvation. Come into my arms." So Marius takes him home, purchases him, and when he gets home, he puts Armand in the bath and assaults him, and it's described as Armand wanting this. There's so much weird consent stuff in these books, but the gist is that Marius is grooming Armand. Armand is, I think, like 14 at the time. Yeah, he's 14 when Marius takes him home, and Marius is 2000, which obviously no age gap of an adult and a 14-year-old would be acceptable, but he sexually abuses Amadeo. But then Amadeo is introduced to all of the other boys that Marius keeps around, because Marius lives in this lovely palazzo in Venice, and he keeps a full stable of boys around, teaching them how to paint and how to be members of society, and he educates them. And Armand meets Ricardo, who's the head boy, and all of the other boys. They explore Venice during the day, and then Amadeo spends the nights with Marius, growing closer and closer to him. Amadeo is taken to meet Bianca. Bianca Soldarini is a courtesan in Venice, and she throws a lot of parties and stuff, and she and Marius are quite close, and so Amadeo also becomes quite close to her. Amadeo is having a lot of problems with religious trauma. In particular, he falls sick one time after just seeing religious art, which is what he used to make. And it is a trauma response, and so he passes out, and Marius heals him with the blood. Marius tells Amadeo not to pursue those feelings that he had towards art yet, and because Marius healed Amadeo with his blood. They start exchanging blood kind of on the regular. Marius drinks from him, and Amadeo drinks from him. Marius sends Amadeo out because he's like, this boy who I groomed doesn't have enough worldly experience. So he sends him to the brothels to sleep with prostitutes there. And Amadeo does, and then when he gets home, Marius is like jealous of him. Of him for having slept with the prostitutes that Marius sent him to. Whatever. Amadeo really just cares about Marius. And he comes home and he begs Marius to make him a confidant, to like tell him what's going on with the whole vampire thing. He says to Marius, "Is there ever a loneliness in you, master, that pushes you to tell someone anything? To have a friend of your own mettle, to confide your heart to one who can comprehend?" And Marius says, "You, spoiled little angel, you think you can be that friend? You're an innocent. You'll be an innocent all of your days. You have the heart of an innocent. You refuse to accept truth that doesn't correspond with some deep, raging faith in you, which makes you ever the monk, ever the little acolyte." Yeah, it's fine. They're not on equal terms, and Marius knows that, and Armand wants to be on equal terms. Amadeo wants to be on equal terms with him, but he refuses. So Amadeo's bender continues. He continues sleeping with prostitutes and stuff, but Marius just gets increasingly jealous, which is great. Amadeo sleeps with a English lord named Lord Harlech, who becomes obsessed with Amadeo, and then gets really mad that Amadeo doesn't want to sleep with him anymore after their first dalliance, and so he becomes a violent, jealous lover. So he's hiding from Lord Harlech, and in doing so, he goes into Bianca's chambers, where the two of them sleep together, and they're not like in love, but they do love each other. Marius comes home then, and is quite jealous, and locks himself in his chambers, whereupon Amadeo breaks his door down with an axe. And then they have really weird sex about it. Their relationship is just not great, and Amadeo once again begs to be told about the dark gift. Marius is like, okay, fine, I will, and then he takes him to go watch him kill a bunch of people. And Amadeo is honestly just not all that repulsed by the whole thing, and Marius leaves for a while to go tend to something that he can't talk to Amadeo about. Whatever, it's those who must be kept. I almost called them those who should not be named, which for Amadeo, apparently they are, but while Marius is gone, Amadeo is receiving letters from Lord Harlech, that jealous lord. Lord Harlech arrives at the palazzo and starts killing boys in the house. And so Amadeo goes out to face him, but he's slashed by Lord Harlech's blade. And although he kills Lord Harlech, he has been poisoned. So he's at home, languishing, dying of poison, being taken care of by Bianca. And finally, Marius gets home. He sees Amadeo on death's door, and he turns him into a vampire. Hang on, flashback. While he's being turned, Amadeo has visions about his past, where he recounts his past, wherein he was being kept at a monastery because of his skills with art, and he was tending to these monks, and the whole thing with this monastery is that they would enclose their monks into caves and just let them pray until they died. So Amadeo would like come and, take care of them, check in on them a little bit, but also just wait for them to die, and it was eventually his plan to also go and do that. Amadeo's dad shows up, and he's like, "That's not why we put you in this monastery. You're a great artist. You should be making art." And so his dad has him paint an icon, and it's a really beautiful icon, and he says, this icon is going to go to the prince of the land. This is in Russia, not Venice. He's going to go to the prince of the land. Let us go deliver it. And he takes Andre at this point, away from the monastery, and they are riding off to the prince, where they are intercepted by slavers, and Andre is taken to Constantinople to be a slave, and that's where his story started. So that's his backstory. Marius teaches Amadeo vampirism, but he gets really annoyed that Amadeo is questioning him about things, and so in order to get some of his questions answered, he takes Amadeo home to Russia to see his family. Now, this goes kind of well as you could hope. His father recognizes him when he goes to visit him at a bar, and Amadeo is able to tell his father to stop drinking and to give him jewelry and money. His mother also finds him and asks him to make the sign of the cross properly, because they're Greek Orthodox, so they do it the other way around, and Amadeo is able to do that, so she's pretty happy. And Amadeo also realizes that they kept the icon that he was going to be delivering to the prince the day that he was taken. So he has some kind of closure on that part of his life a little bit, which is nice, but he doesn't really get fully walked out. But they go back to Venice, and both of them sleep with Bianca at one point, because why not? But Marius still will not tell Amadeo about those who must be kept, even though he's a vampire now. So that's unfortunate. And before that can go any further, Santino shows up and burns down the house with the satanic coven. Amadeo is taken, and they teach him about the cult as much as they can, and he's really trying to deny it and trying to fight back against it. However, they then starve him for a week and put Ricardo, who is his best friend and the head boy, in the same room as him, and so he eats Ricardo, and that level of shame that he feels from having done that to his best friend is enough to make him a full-fledged member of the coven, and he joins them. And then he becomes leader of the Paris Coven for 300 years. And then you know what happens from here on out. Lestat shows up and disassembles the coven, and then Louis shows up and literally murders the rest of the coven. At one point, he does think that he sees Bianca in Paris, which he's been there for like 300 years. So obviously, something has to have happened to her in order to make that happen. Armand goes through the events of Memnoch the Devil, and hang on. Armand goes through the events of Memnoch the Devil, and we're caught up to when he exploded himself in a fire, if you will remember. It turns out that when he was on fire, he heard somebody being abused, so he laser beamed himself into that building where they were being abused. And it was a young woman and a young man, and her older brother was there abusing her. And so, no, not Lestat, Armand. He became Armand when he took over the coven, by the way. I forgot to say that. Armand kills the older brother, saves the girl from abuse, and then she plays the song The Appassionata, and then the next thing Armand realizes, he's waking up on a rooftop and he's incredibly crispy. He enters the dreams of Sybil and Benji, who are the kids that he just saved from the abuser, and tells them to come and save him. And they do, because they're kind of the coolest. Sybil and Benji come and save Armand and take him back to their home, where they get him a drug dealer to eat, which is so sweet of them. I cannot tell you how much I adore Sybil, Benji, and Armand. They are the best little familial unit, and if only we could get Daniel involved in there, it would be perfect. But they also have a heart-to-heart, because in a lot of ways, Sybil and Benji's so young. Benji is a young boy who's been taking care of Sybil, and Sybil is just this impassioned pianist artist who just loves music and art more than anything. And so in both of these characters, the resourceful young man and the artistic young woman, Armand sees a lot of himself, and he has this conversation with Sybil. "We're alike, you and I," she whispered. "Alike?" I asked. "What in the world can you be thinking of?" "Monsters," she said. "Children." I smiled, but she didn't smile. "I was so glad when you came. I knew he was dead," referring to her older brother. "I knew when you stood at the end of the piano and when you looked at me. I knew when you stood there listening to me. I was so happy there was someone who could kill him." I feel like I should mention at this point Daniel's gone. They kind of explain that at the end of Queen of the Damned, Armand and Daniel just split ways, and that's one of my least favorite things about these books, because there's so many relationships that like get mended or come together in a book, and then the next book it's like, Anne just wasn't really into that, so it's not really happening anymore. And Armand and Daniel are one of them, but I do feel like Sybil and Benji act as a kind of refined version of what Daniel was to Armand, where it's someone that sees him for all of his weirdness and all of his monstrousness, and still like needs him and accepts him and needs him as much as he needs them. And that being needed, I think, is very important to his character. So the three of them become a lovely little family. He has his two little friends, and they're all good. Armand is going to go off to New Orleans to investigate what's going on with Lestat because he's still in a coma. While he does that, he leaves Sybil and Benji under the care of Marius, which is... it's just a questionable thing to do with the man who abused you, but whatever. He goes to New Orleans, he finds comatose Lestat and drinks his blood, and he sees the crucifixion and everything. And anyway, this was meant to be Armand's life story the whole time. And it wasn't. Oh well! he returns home to New York to discover, he shouldn't have been surprised by this, that Marius has turned Sybil and Benji. And this is... I get Marius's reasoning, because he doesn't want Sybil and Benji to just go dying on Armand, but Armand specifically liked them because they were human, you know? Like, he was... So, Armand says to Marius, "How could you do it? Why did you do it? Do you hate me so much? Do not lie to me," etc., etc. And Marius says, he says, "Didn't you do it, master? You did it for hate. You did it for vengeance." And Marius says, "How could I? If ever I did anything for love, I have done this for it. I did it for love and for you. I did it for all the wrongs you and all the wrongs done you, and the loneliness you've suffered, and the horrors that the world put upon you when you were too young and too untried to know how to fight them, and then too vanquished to wage a battle with a full heart. I did it for you." It's that thing that we just keep getting in the books where it's like, oh, but it's actually better that you're a vampire now. And it's like, well, yeah, but like, I didn't want to be a vampire. I didn't want that person to become a vampire, but they are now, and you can't take that back. It's, whatever, it's fine. Marius, Benji and Sybil seem pretty happy to be vampires, to be honest. Like, they don't seem unhappy with it, but Armand is quite pissed. And Marius comes to the point where he admits that he's changed his mind about human souls being the best. He's decided that he likes vampires more now. Whatever, he wanted to do it to give Sybil and Benji time to find answers about life, the universe, and everything. Marius asks Armand who he saw on the veil, and Armand says about Jesus that he was my brother. Yes, that is what he was. My brother and the symbol of all brothers. And that is why he was the Lord, and that is why his core is simply love. He was human whether he was God or not. He was suffering, and he was doing it for things he thought were purely and universally good. Okay, sure, so Armand fully believes in God, as it were. Sybil plays the Appassionata for Armand, which is her signature song, and that's the end of the book. That is the Vampire Armand. Maybe now's the time when I point out that I'm going to be making a lot of mistakes through this whole thing, and that I must not be judged for those mistakes. We are now at approximately the halfway point with Merrick from the year 2000. Now Merrick is part of a new sub-series. By the way, this is also part of a new sub-series. This is like the Venice sub-series. It's just ones that take place primarily in Venice and involve Armand and Marius a lot. There's only 2 in the series, but you know, Pandora would also fit that. Next up we have Merrick, which is kind of a part of the Witches series. There's a whole nother series that Anne Rice had going that takes place in the same universe about the Mayfair witches. A whole bunch more books that happen with them, and there's a lot of crossover from the witches in this, but I'm not going to talk about all the witches books because I would rather perish. So, in Merrick, we are back in New Orleans, and David is meeting up with Merrick Mayfair because he shouldn't be here. Because Louis and David are living together, they're besties, and Louis wants to summon Claudio's ghost, and Merrick has the powers to be able to do that. She has a connection with the spirit world. So David reminisces about the fact that he has loved 3 people in his life: Aaron Leitner, who's a Talamasca member, Lestat de Liancourt, and Merrick Mayfair. He recalls going to meet Merrick for the first time with Aaron Leitner when she was a kid. She was living with her godmother, a witch named Nanane, and she tells David and Aaron Leitner about her family history, which is that she's an offshoot from the Mayfair family. Particularly, she is black. She's part of the black side of the Mayfair family, which is excluded from the white side of the Mayfair family, unsurprisingly, because it was New Orleans in like the 1960s or 70s. Merrick was made an orphan by the death of her mother, Cold Sandra, and her older sister, who's named Honey in the Sunshine. And in the present day, Merrick notes that David has changed because he's literally a vampire in a different body, but she's not particularly swayed by this. And there is a little bit of guilt happening because David has been abandoning all of his friends in the Talamasca, including Aaron Leitner, who died without ever seeing David again, which is quite sad. There are some things involved where David is seeing weird things after leaving Merrick. He's being like pursued by spirits. He comes back to her hotel at one point to see that she's set up a shrine. But the long and the short of it is that it is time for Merrick's life story as told, I think importantly, by David Talbot and not actually from Merrick's point of view. On her deathbed, Merrick's godmother Nanaine gave up Merrick to the Talamasca. Sorry, blacked out for a second there. She gave them to the Talamasca, and Merrick refers to her childhood, talking about how, oh my god, her family comes from like a long line of voodoo magicians. And there was a whole thing where there was a book that contained a secret guide to a cave in Central America where she and her mom and her sister once went with another guy to go and check out a bunch of relics. So they went to this cave in Central America, found a bunch of relics. Now she has like this giant jade axe and stuff that she just happens to have inherited. So they went on that trip. Whatever. So the night that her godmother dies, she's given to the Talamasca, and that night she is possessed by the spirit of her older sister, Honey in the Sunshine. And Honey talks to David about someone named Joshua, which really freaks David out. But they manage to exorcise the spirit of Honey out of Merrick. It turns out that Joshua was an 18-year-old member of the Talamasca who David fell in love with and was in a relationship with, which is gross. And then they went on a mountain climbing expedition that they probably shouldn't have gone on, where Joshua died. So David has a lot of guilt about that. And Honey brought it up because she has supernatural powers and knows this stuff. In exchange for talking about David's trauma about Joshua, Merrick talks about how her sister and mother were killed 4 years ago when they were murdered while buying a car and sunk in the car into a swamp. Merrick gets an education, and when she is 25 and David is 70, she hits him up again because she wants to go back to Central America, to the tomb that she had once gone to look at those relics and check out more stuff. And David kind of reluctantly agrees because he's 70, and also, man, I don't like David. He's like been attracted to Merrick since he met her when she was like 14, and he's worried that now that she's 25, he's going to be even more attracted to her. Ew. Merrick summons Honey's spirit, so her older sister's spirit, to help get directions, and they do that. And so they take their field assistants with them to Central America. While they're in Central America, of course, they immediately have sex. So again, she's 25 now, so that's good, but he did know her when she was 14, which feels less good. They make it to the cave, where they were guided by Honey's directions, where they are buffeted by spirits on all sides, but they find a giant jade death mask that when you put it on, it allows you to see into the past, which is pretty cool. David, while they're there in the cave, is struck suddenly ill, like the last guy that they brought there was, and he has to be hospitalized, but he does recover, and now they have that jade mask, and Merrick goes and studies in Egypt for a while, and that's basically Merrick's life story in incredibly brief summary. So, a couple of weeks later, back in the present day, Merrick returns with some relics that the Talamasca had of Claudia's, some belongings of hers, and they gather her possessions together. They read out a page of Claudia's diary, and she says that Louis will do as I wish, even unto the very destruction of Lestat. Perhaps in my court of heart, I hold Louis far more accountable for my present state than I ever could blame my impulsive and simple Lestat. The fact is, one must die for this, or the pain in me will never be sealed off, and immortality is but a monstrous measurement of what I shall suffer till the world revolves to its ultimate end. One must die so that the other will become ever more dependent on me, ever more completely my slave. She says, such a fate is simply unthinkable with Lestat's ungovernable and irascible character. Such a fate seems made for my melancholy Louis. Claudia was just as, if not more, resentful towards Louis when it came to her turning. She just killed Lestat because she knew that Louis would be easier to manipulate than Lestat. And I love this development for Claudia's character, and I can't wait to get to that in the show. Trust me! Anyway, so they read that page of the diary, and then they use Honey's skull, which is Merrick's older sister's skull, which she's dug up out of the swamp where the car was submerged, which is a little messed up, and they use that to summon Claudia. And she is not happy. She hurls some truly awful vitriol at Louis. She basically says, like, first off, no, I am not happy and peaceful. Second off, I want you to join me. Third off, end your life so that you can forever pursue me in death because I want to see you miserable. It is really genuinely awful stuff. She leaves and Louis runs off because he's obviously a little bit distressed about all the things that he's heard, and Merrick does insist that the ghost of Claudia was lying, or that it wasn't really Claudia's ghost. But this is kind of the last thing we get from her, which is pretty grim. It is at this point that Merrick admits that earlier when David was like seeing spirits everywhere and stuff, that was because Merrick had put a spell on him. It was because she had fixed him upon her because she wanted his attention. And so that's a little bit messed up. So Louis and David meet up, and Louis is becoming more and more obsessed with Merrick, which is unsurprising because she already put one spell on David to make him obsessed with her. So who's to say that she couldn't do it again? Louis runs off, and David is approached by Merrick, who is a vampire. It turns out she got Louis to turn her, and then Louis, left himself in the sun to die and has burnt into a pile of ash. This is pretty bad, and it's enough for Lestat to come out of his coma and show up because his boyfriend is dead. That's not good. And so they all take their blood then and dump it on Louis's charred remains, and it brings him back. He's fine now. So I guess that's, you can just be burnt completely to a crisp, and as long as your ashes stay generally in the same area, if you pour enough blood on it, it'll all work out. Anyway, Merrick then confesses to having put a spell on both David and Louis to make them obsessed with her, and Merrick is ordered to return to the Talamasca mother house by the Talamasca. They say no, and Lestat agrees to flee New Orleans, and so they all decide to flee New Orleans together as a little vampire family that inevitably will not stay together after the end of this book. David leaves a letter to the Talamasca saying, "You have made yourselves an interesting adversary to one who loves challenges, Lestat, and it will require all of my considerable influence to protect you individually and collectively from the avid lust which you have so foolishly aroused." So they go away, and that's the end of the book. You'll note that the less I like a book, the less I'm going to talk about it. Sue me, I'm human. It's time for 2001's Blood and Gold, aka Marius. Marius and more Marius. God help me. Okay, I don't know where we are in this book because they don't really specify, but Thorn is waking up, and Thorn is a really old, like, Scandinavian vampire, I think. And he wakes up in an ice cave and he goes to find another vampire who happens to be Marius. Marius has somehow ended up being best friends with Daniel Malloy. He's taken Daniel in and they live together, and Daniel spends all of his days building, and I'm not joking, model trains to the point where he doesn't eat. He just builds model trains. And anyway, Thorn is like, "Hey, tell me your deal, Marius." And Marius is like, "Yeah, it's time for my entire life story." Again. So Marius brings up his turning, yada yada yada, tree, druids, etc., having to escape and become a vampire on his own, getting those who must be kept. And then he talks about his time in Antioch with Pandora, which is explored more in the book Pandora. Marius is such a simp for Pandora, which makes sense because she's perfect. But he's also like, I can't go and be with her. And he says, "I don't know why I can't go be with her. I know only that a terrible anger and pain divides us, just as it did so many years ago. I cannot admit how much I have wronged her. I cannot admit how much I have lied about my love of her and my need of her. And this need is the thing which keeps me at a distance, where I am safe from the scrutiny of her soft and wise brown eyes." So basically, Pandora and Marius had a really contentious relationship, wherein Pandora had like a backbone. Marius didn't like that. He didn't like that she had like opinions and stuff, which is why he keeps people like groomed children and Daniel Malloy building trains with him. So Pandora knows about those who must be kept, and she wants to create a religion around them. She wants to tell other vampires around them, allow them to come, allow them to worship, because she sees how misguided all of them are by the fact that they have no, like, origin story and no common belief to tie them together. But Marius refuses because he thinks that it would be a bad thing if all of the vampires knew about it. So Pandora's like, "Okay, whatever. But while they're in Antioch, vampires keep showing up and asking to see those who must be kept because they've heard about them. And so at one point they have to kill a whole band of vampires just because they know too much. And Marius doesn't like that. Pandora's not a fan of it, but she's also just like, yeah, what needs to be done needs to be done. Marius is really upset, so he locks himself away. And when Pandora gives him the silent treatment, because he's giving her the silent treatment, he packs up everything and leaves her. He just abandons her, which is awesome. Marius packs up and moves him and those who must be kept to Rome. There he's approached by Mael, who's the druid priest who helped turn him. He was one of the priests that was running the whole shebang, and he is now a vampire, and also angry at Marius for leaving. And he's also with a guy named Avicus, who's a much older vampire. And I know I brought up Mael at some point in the middle of this, and I don't remember when. Jesse goes to stay at Maharet's compound for a while and really likes it, and there's a vampire there also named Mael. So these two vampires, the druid priest that helped coax him and Avicus, who's actually, as they find out, Avicus was a god of a different grove. So you know how there was a guy in a tree who they were worshipping? Avicus was a different guy in a different tree being worshipped by different people, and Mael was sent to be turned by Avicus to replace Marius when he had dipped after being turned. And then while Avicus and Mael were together, they planned an escape, and so Avicus and Mael turned each other and now they're companions. Marius avoids the shrine for a while after seeing them and inviting them into his house just because he's scared that they're going to know about the shrine and he really doesn't want that to happen. And Marius starts hosting these philosophy parties where he just gets together all of the hot young people from the area to talk about philosophy. And Constantinople at this point, historically speaking, becomes the capital, and so he's really sad. At one point, Mael is completely dismembered, and Marius helps just kind of put him back together, because if a vampire like gets an arm cut off, you just kind of have to put it back in the right spot and it'll heal back together, or whatever. And Marius continues insisting to Mael and Avicus that the legend of the good mother, so like the legend that there is a good vampire mother somewhere, he continues insisting that that's not true. Which, to be fair, it is technically untrue. She's not... Akasha is not a good mother in the sense that, like, she's a present figure in vampiric life. She just happens to be the first one, and Marius is very cognizant of vampires beginning to worship her, and he wants to stop that. So Mael eventually forces Marius to take the two of them down to those who must be kept. And Mael tries to drink from Akasha, but is almost killed by Enkiel, who gets jealous. And so Marius stops him from being killed, and they all kind of come to some sort of an agreement. Then Rome falls in the year 400 or so. And Mael, Marius, and Avicus all escape together, and they go to Constantinople. In Constantinople, they realize that there's already a vampire there, a lady vampire named Eudoxia. Eudoxia is... kind of insane. She demands immediately that Marius hand over Akasha and Enkiel because she saw them a couple hundred years ago, and she wants to be the one in control of them. And then as Marius is trying to leave, she tries to set him on fire, which is where Marius realizes that the flame gift is a thing. The vampires in this world have powers that as you get older, you get more of them. So there's the flame gift, and as Marius and the other vampires, Avicus and Mael, come to understand, there's also the cloud gift, which means you can fly, the mind gift, which is like the vampire telepathy things. And then they also discover something called the killing gift, which means you can just kind of explode people's hearts with your brain. And it's not that... I understand that Anne Rice's vampires are overpowered. That's kind of the whole thing. They have infinite money, they're infinitely hot, and they have no rules. So, like, what happens when you have someone with infinite powers, infinite hotness, and infinite money? All morality's kind of out of the window, and you have to figure out a new way of living. So I understand that they're meant to be overpowered. But the kill gift? The kill gift that they can just kill people? Anyway, Eudoxia arrives and brute forces her way into the shrine. They fight again, and this time Akasha is the one to kill Eudoxia, so she's no longer a problem. And Marius decides to go and be alone for his own sake, and also just for the sake of those who must be kept, because he doesn't want to get Abacus and Mile into any more danger. But first, he goes into Eudoxia's house and finds a fledgling vampire named Zenobia, a girl who was turned. And he's like, I can't take you with me, so can I give you to Abacus and Mile? And Abacus and Mile are like, no, we don't want no stinky fledgling with us. And so he teaches her about how to be a vampire, and then Abacus is willing to take her, even though Mile is still kind of pissed about it. Marius then goes into the Alps to hide those who must be kept, and sleeps through, kind of just like the whole Middle Ages. He's like, I don't really like this whole plague thing, the whole Dark Ages thing, not really my jam, so I'm just not gonna live through any of it. And he sleeps for like 300 years. But he wakes up and then goes to check out Rome, and they're just kind of in Italy in general, so it's easier for me if I just say Italy. He goes to Rome to admire the art there, where Santino, who is the leader of the Satanic Coven, comes to talk to him and is like, hey, would you rule my Satanic Coven for me? To which Marius says no, because I don't believe in that stuff. And Santino's like, yeah, but we're kind of aimless and we really need like guidance, a belief system, an origin story. And Marius is like, I know these two are here, but I don't really wanna. So he doesn't, which is, I'm not gonna say his problems are his fault, but you know, the problems wouldn't be around if he wasn't there. Marius has always been an admirer of art, so he goes to Florence where he meets Botticelli and is almost like, maybe I should turn Botticelli into a vampire because I really like his art, but ultimately decides not to. And he begins painting and sets up a house for himself in Venice. There he befriends Bianca, and also, that's where Armand, Amadeo, Andre, that whole thing happens, and he turns Armand. So he has very mixed feelings when it comes to Amadeo, because at first when he sees him, he's immediately like, this kid will make a perfect vampire. And then he gets to know him a little bit more and he says this: I relinquished my claim upon the child. I couldn't condemn him to the dark blood, no matter how great my loneliness or how great his former misery had been. He must have his chance now among the apprentices and scholars of my household, and should he prove to be a princeling as I fully expected from his immediate brightness, he should have his chance to move to the University of Padua or the University of Bologna, where my students were now going one after the other. He eventually decides that Amadeo is too perfect to be made a vampire. Obviously that doesn't go so well, but the whole story happens. And then even before Amadeo's turning, he has a second sarcophagus, a second coffin made up for Amadeo. So he absolutely knew that this was going to be happening. So he turns Amadeo, they do the whole education, they sleep with Bianca, they take the trip back to Russia, where Marius is actually kind of jealous of Amadeo's family, which is kind of messed up. He literally says, I, with all my power, could not replace Amadeo's father in Amadeo's mind. Yeah, because you're not his dad. Marius says, why was I so jealous? Why did this knowledge sting me so much? I loved Amadeo as I had loved Pandora. I loved him as I had loved Botticelli. Amadeo was among these, the great loves of my long life. I tried to forget my jealousy or ignore it. After all, what was to be done about it? Yeah, so I don't like Marius, but he is very jealous of Amadeo and his ability to be close to his family, and the fact that he's not Amadeo's dad, despite also being in love with Amadeo. Whatever. Anyway, after this, he meets Raymond Gallant. Raymond Gallant is a member of the Talamasca who lives over in England, and he's just like, I've never met a vampire and I want to meet a vampire, and so I'm meeting you. And Marius is like, hi! Just a question. Do you know where Pandora is? And Raymond's like, not at the moment. No. And then after that, Raymond Gallant leaves, and Santino attacks and destroys the palazzo and kidnaps Amadeo, and Marius is burnt to a crisp. The only way that he survives is by... Okay, I can't find Vampire Bianca, but he turns Bianca. So he has Bianca come and save him, and then he drinks all of her blood and then gives his blood back to her, because that's how it goes. And so she becomes a vampire, and now they are together as vampires. He gathers his strength to take the two of them back to the shrine where they who must be kept are kept, but he does not go after Amadeo, who's been kidnapped by Santino, because Akasha tells him not to. She tells him not to pursue his own fledgling, but instead to look for Pandora. And so Marius does that and does not look for Armand. In fact, he writes to Raymond Gallant, that member of the Talamasca, asking him to look for Pandora for him. Bianca is... God, I love her too. She's an absolute trooper through all of this. She really struggles with becoming a vampire, especially because as soon as she becomes a vampire, she gets carried out to the Alps, where there's like no human company or anything. And eventually she's like, hey, Marius, could we live somewhere that's not the Alps, maybe? And they have a fight about this. And Bianca does eventually realize that the whole Santino situation is absolutely Marius's fault. That he was the one who saw Santino and was like, no, you're gross. I don't want to get involved with you, even though you're asking me for something that I could absolutely provide. And so she accuses Marius of being at fault here. And Marius responds to this, honestly, in a pretty mature way. He picks her up, he flies her off to a remote village and abandons her. I don't like him. Anyway, within like 2 minutes of dropping her off in this remote village, he comes to his senses and goes and picks her up. And of course she apologizes to him. Of course she apologizes to him, which is just great. Marius goes and talks to Raymond and finds out that Pandora is in Dresden and that she might be in some kind of trouble because she might be being held hostage by her fledgling Arjun. He finally goes and sees Armand. You know, Armand, his own fledgling, who is been inducted into a satanic cult. He sees Armand ruling his satanic coven as he's been doing for the past like 200 years because, again, Marius never came and found him and he thinks Marius is dead. And he says, he was not my Amadeo anymore. That is what I had come to Paris to learn, and now I knew the truth of it. I felt sadness, I felt despair, but maybe it was anger and revulsion which caused me to leave Paris that night. He has the nerve to be disgusted by the consequences of his own actions. So what's a Marius to do? Why, he buys a house in Dresden, where Pandora is, and you know what he doesn't do? He doesn't tell Bianca, his current romantic partner, why they're moving to Dresden. She's just excited to be out of the Alps. Meanwhile, he's looking for Pandora, obviously. And you know what? Once they get there, Bianca is actually the one to find Pandora. She finds Pandora, and she's so excited for Marius. She's like, I know you missed her, and I found her. You should go and talk to her. And so Marius is like, okay, I will do this. I will go talk to her. So Marius goes to Pandora and is like, hi, I love you. Come and be a part of my vampire family. I'll rescue you from your fledgling. And she's like, yeah, you actually already have somebody though. You have somebody that is your romantic vampiric life partner. And Marius is like, okay, but like we could all live together. And she's like, yeah, but I actually don't want to be like your side piece. And he's like, oh, well, I'll leave Bianca and then we can be together. And Pandora's like, no, because it turns out that even though people said that she had been kidnapped by her, or was being held hostage by her fledgling Arjun, she was actually perfectly happy with him and totally fine. And so she turns Marius down and they drink from each other, and it's a nice little goodbye that they have. So he gets home and Bianca sits him down and says, I feel sorry for you. Do you? I asked. I hope you do, my precious darling, because I love you. I love you more than I have ever loved you, and I need you. But that's just the point, you see, she said in a low, compassionate voice. I heard the things you said to her, and I'm leaving you. Yes! So Bianca heard everything. She heard Marius say that he would absolutely leave her for Pandora, and she's like, I actually don't think that I want anything to do with you anymore, which is fair. She leaves, which is good for her. Marius moves to the Aegean Sea onto that island in the 1700s and finds a letter from Pandora while he's in the move. He just happened to lose this letter from Pandora and never opened it. And it was a letter from shortly after he left her that was saying, oh my God, come help me. I need your help right now. We can be together forever. And he missed the letter. God, justice is so nice sometimes. So he missed the letter. He never got to be with Pandora as he wanted to be, whatever. The events of the Vampire Lestat happen, where Lestat comes there and drinks from Akasha and wakes her up with the violin. The events of Queen of the Damned. And then we have finally gotten to the end of Marius's life story. Now, Thorn has just heard all of this. So Thorn is like, you know what? I think that Santino's the problem. And Marius is like, you know what? I bet he is the problem. 'Cause I'd never be the problem. No, it's Santino. So Marius and Thorn fly off to Maharet's compound, where she is with Mekare. And everyone is there. Pandora's there. Armand is there. Santino is importantly there. And Marius is like, I think I should be allowed to kill Santino. And Maharet's like, I think that actually is not how that should probably go. However, you forget that Thorn is there, and that this book introduced the kill gift. Santino points his finger at Thorn in terror, but it was not quick enough. Thorn sent all his strength at Santino, and all Santino could do as he fell to his knees was cry out Thorn over and over again, his body exploding, the blood flowing from every orifice, the fire finally erupting from his chest and head as he twisted and collapsed on the stone floor, the flames at last consuming him. He just popped him like a party popper, like a balloon. Thorn accuses Maharet of being weak in her leadership, and in retribution, Mekare rips out Thorn's eyes and gives them to Maharet. There's been a whole thing going where Maharet, because she got her eyes ripped out by Akasha a long time ago, she's just been using substitute eyes, and so she kills a human victim and then takes their eyes and uses them until they rot. But now she has Thorn's eyes, which are vampire eyes, so those should last longer. And Thorn is put into prison because he just killed a guy, but he's actually happy about it. And that is Blood and Gold done. Unfortunately, I can't celebrate that we are on number 9 and thus 4 away from finishing, because next up we have 2002's Blackwood Farms. I enjoyed all of these books in one way or another. These next two made it feel like I was losing my mind, and I am at a point in this process where I already feel like I'm kind of there, so let's see how this goes. Alright, we're introduced to Tarquin Blackwood. He's a baby vamp who's writing a letter to Lestat because he's having issues with his childhood best friend and imaginary friend, Goblin, who is like him, but an imaginary friend version of him. So he breaks into Lestat's house at the same time as a Talamasca agent that he knows, whose name is Sterling. He tells Sterling to leave, and then he feeds on Sterling, but he's saved from killing Sterling because Lestat shows up. They feed together, and then they go home to Tarquin's home of Blackwood Farm. Blackwood Farm is an old house, and they go and stop to see Lorraine McQueen, also known as Aunt Queen, who is Quinn's great-great-great-aunt. She is great-great? I think just 2 greats. Great-great-aunt. She's the coolest. I will say, I don't like this book, but I do like Aunt Queen. She's an old lady that dresses really nicely every day and still wears like 6-inch heels, and I respect that like hell. She mentions her grandfather Manfred, who was kind of just a bastard. He was not a great guy. And Quinn makes special mention of the fact that he kisses her feet. You'll notice a recurring pattern. And I'm not saying it's wrong to kiss someone's feet. It's just like a little bit weird when it's your great-great-aunt, and you do it just so many times. Lestat sits down and he's like, hey Quinn, tell me your deal. Quinn grew up a weird and lonely child, and his only other friend in childhood was Goblin, who was an imaginary friend and also a bit of a bastard. They talk about the background of the family, which involved Manfred, who's old guy, coming to the farm with his wife Virginia Lee in 1881. Virginia was killed by sickness, and Manfred went mad, and they traced the whole family line. It's really not that relevant, to be honest. Goblin was Quinn's only friend, but he also tortured him a little bit and made everyone in the family think that he was crazy because no one else could see him, except like people could kind of see him, but they were basically just like, I don't really want to tell him because, you know. Patsy is Tarquin's mother, and she is the black sheep of the family because she sleeps around and plays loud rock music. Quinn, now that he's an adult, ish, is visited by the ghost of Rebecca Stafford, who's someone from the family's past. And he sleeps with this ghost, just fully sleeps with the ghost. And while he's sleeping with her, she has him set the curtains on fire. So they put the fire out, but Rebecca Stafford is she's not a good person, as it were. She does task Quinn with figuring out how she died, and in order to do that, he's gonna have to go to Sugar Devil Island, which is kind of out in the bayou, and there is a house there called the Hermitage. Quinn goes out to the Hermitage where he finds Rebecca's remains, or what he assumes to be Rebecca's remains, but they're turned into goo. And he gets home and Aunt Queen tells him that Rebecca was one of Manfred, that old bastard's lovers, and when Rebecca demanded to marry Manfred, she vanished. So probably Manfred killed her at the Hermitage, but who can say? Quinn goes on to kiss Aunt Queen's feet again. It is described in explicit detail again. He types out an anti-trespassing letter to post on the Hermitage. Oh yeah, because he realized that someone's been living at the Hermitage. So he goes back to post that. Quinn is so weird. Tarquin Blackwood makes me feel insane. Oh my god. So he's a 17-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid at this point, and he lives with all old women. He has serious mommy issues. He doesn't like his own mother, but he does share a bed with one of the elderly women of the house every single night, and he can't sleep unless there is a woman over the age of 60 sleeping in a bed with him. It's constantly described that he wears full-length nightgowns every night to sleep and can't sleep unless he's wearing a full-length nightgown. And he also talks like no one has ever spoken before. And when he gets sent out to Sugar Devil Island and the Hermitage this time, their housekeeper, Jasmine, who he also kind of has a crush on despite the fact that she's 35, she sends him with sandwiches and with 6 beers. There were sandwiches and an apple, but 6 beers! I don't think I'll ever forget that moment, but there's no point in lingering on it. I have too much to tell. Oh, thank you. Let me only say that I whispered to the open air, Jasmine, can a woman of 35 find romance with a boy of 18? I'll meet ya behind the big house at 6. So he says that about his 35-year-old housekeeper. Then he proceeds to sit on the porch of this sketchy house and drink all 6 beers. Unsurprisingly, he passes out because he just drank 6 beers. And, okay, hang on. This is a lot. So he sees another vision of Rebecca, has sex with her again, and it's like a vision of her death. So he knows how she died. She got hung on a hook and turned to goo. It was really gnarly. He sees someone, when he wakes up, he sees someone dumping bodies in the bayou, which isn't great. He manages to get home, but during the night he's warned to give up the chase by some kind of a dark figure that comes to his room. The next morning, the FBI searches the island and takes the remains back for investigation. And later that day, while in the shower, he and Goblin have a sexual encounter. His imaginary friend. Of all the things that could happen, this couldn't be the worst. His grandpa dies. They exhume Rebecca's grave, that's the ghost he's been sleeping with, and they find no remains in there, which corroborates the theory that that's her body hanging gooified in the Hermitage. And so they bury the goo where her grave was supposed to be. At this point, they go home, and Quinn, 18-year-old Tarquin, and 35-year-old Jasmine, the housekeeper, have sex. And don't worry, Tarquin kisses her feet. Okay, in the middle of the night, Tarquin is attacked by a vampire who it's surmised is the figure that was dumping bodies at the Hermitage. He gets taken to the hospital, and there he banishes Rebecca's ghost from her. He meets his new tutor, Nash, at the hospital there, and while he's also at the hospital, he notices a red-headed girl named Mona, who he's so surprised can see Goblin. So his, first words to her to Mona Mayfair, I want to marry you, I'm in love with you. Strong opening, Tarquin. As you can see from her last name, Mona is a Mayfair of the Mayfair witches family, and so that's why she can see Goblin, but Tarquin is immediately taken with her. So at this point, he also meets Sterling Oliver, who was that Talamasca officer from the beginning, but he meets him now. Because his grandpa died, Blackwood Farms passes on to Quinn. He finds out that his grandpa had slept with a local woman, who had a son, whose name was Tommy. So Tommy is technically Quinn's uncle, but he's younger than Quinn. He's like 10 or whatever. So Quinn kind of takes him in as a pseudo-child. Nash, the tutor I mentioned, comes out to Quinn and is like, I can't work with you because I'm gay. And Quinn, hang on, are you telling me you're gay? I asked. Well, to be frank, said Nash, that's exactly what I intended to tell you. I knew that last night, I said. Oh, don't worry that you gave it away with some obvious gesture or mannerism. You didn't. I just sensed it because I'm probably that way myself. At least I'm bisexual. I have no doubt of that. So Quinn comes out as bi, and he's like, that because of that I have a gaydar, so I knew, I saw you. And Nash was gonna quit because he was like, I don't want it to become weird because I'm gay and you're a man. And Quinn's like, what if we promise to never sleep with each other? Which in any other situation would be kind of weird, because it's like, why were we assuming that you were gonna? But frankly, Quinn will kind of sleep with anything that moves, including his own imaginary friend version of himself. So I don't blame them for that. He picks up Mona, speaking of which. He goes and picks up Mona from her house. They go and have sex and have a conversation about how she's, to clarify, she's like 15. She's a messed up character a little bit. She's like 15, and she had a hoe phase like last year where she slept with all of her cousins systematically, one by one, and then also she had a baby at one point that she had to give up, and she's really upset about that. She's also engaged to Pierce Mayfair, who's a member of the Mayfair family. Quinn's not happy about that, so he counter-proposes and also asks Mona to marry him, but she knows that that won't be good, and she gets picked up by Rowan Mayfair and Michael Curry, who are her guardians. Okay, so that vampire you remember from a couple minutes ago who came and told Quinn to stop investigating things. The vampire shows up and tells Quinn to do renovations on the Hermitage. So he organizes that, and then he goes to Tommy, who was technically his uncle, but is a young boy, and gives their family money. He goes to meet Mona and meets the ghost of Julian Mayfair, who's an older member of the Mayfair family, and he doesn't realize he's a ghost. He also realizes then that Mona's sick, and that's why she was at the hospital, because she has to get constant transfusions because she's on death's door for a reason he does not yet understand. So he goes home, and when he does, he finds his beloved Aunt Queen partying with none other but the vampire that's been causing him so many problems, whose name is Petronia. The interesting thing about Petronia is that when he first saw them, he thought that they were a man. However, now they're dressed as a gorgeous, gorgeous women with voluptuous tracts of land, and so he's really confused, and he's like, what's going on? And it turns out that Petronia is intersex, and that typically she embodies female, but just when he saw her, she happened to be dressed as a man. So he's really confused about that, and he tells Sterling Oliver, that Talamasca agent, everything that's been happening, and it's at this point, my voice is going out, that he, Aunt Queen, and Tommy, the boy who is his uncle, leave on a 3-year trip to Europe. They leave behind Goblin, because Goblin can't go far from the property of Blackwood Farms. And they also leave behind Mona because she's very sick, but they agree to keep in contact through email. He's also going to email Goblin because Goblin can operate a computer. It's a long story, don't worry about it. So after 3 years, they come home, whereupon Quinn realizes that, you remember that housekeeper he slept with, Jasmine? Yeah, she had his son, so he has a son named Jerome now, who just lives on the property of Blackwood Farms, I guess. But as soon as he gets home, he is kidnapped by Petronia, the vampire, the intersex vampire, who takes him off to Italy, flies him to Italy, where he's introduced to Arian, and a vampire named Manfred, who's the old bastard in the Blackwood family. He's a vampire. It doesn't really have any effect on the story, but Petronia, the vampire who kidnapped Quinn, makes Quinn fight her, and he is turned in a way that is too obscene for me to talk about on YouTube. Go ahead and read the book if you really want to find out. He takes Arian's blood as well once he's been turned and is educated. He returns home and discovers that his mother Patsy has AIDS. And also that Goblin has been, like, on a rampage ever since he got turned into a vampire. He was already, like, going on rampages when they were off in Europe. But now he's really going crazy because Quinn is a vampire. That's the end of Quinn's life story. That about catches us up to where we are. Goblin's attacks have been getting worse. And also there's this thing where when Quinn feeds on blood as a vampire, Goblin, like, phases through him and sucks droplets of blood out of his body, and it makes Goblin stronger. So Goblin is also kind of a vampire? I don't know. Quinn sends Mona flowers. He's been sending Mona flowers, but he's too scared to visit her because he didn't get to visit her before he got turned into a vampire, and now he knows that she's going to realize that he's a vampire. Goblin then kills Aunt Queen, the really cool old lady, which is a damn shame, and they have a whole funeral for her. It is at this point that Patsy, who is Quinn's mom, she reveals that when he was born, Quinn had a twin brother who he killed in utero by absorbing the nutrients from his twin. Not funny, sad. However, that twin is Goblin. Goblin is his twin brother, which is unfortunate, knowing some of the things that you know. They make a plan to get rid of Goblin with none other than Merrick Mayfair, because she's the expert in these sorts of things. Quinn then kills his mom. He kills Patsy just because she's annoying and he doesn't like her, so he kills Patsy. And Rebecca's ghost, do you remember that ghost that he had sex with so long ago? Rebecca's ghost then fades because she's like, well, the life debt is complete, a life for a life. What is your game plan, girl? So they confront Goblin with the infant body of Quinn's brother, who would have been Quinn's brother. Merrick and Goblin and the body jump into the fire and die. So now Merrick Mayfair is officially dead. I don't know why we made a whole character just for her to die at the end of a random book that's not even about her, but who am I to say? So Sterling tells Quinn, Sterling, Talmasca agent, tells Quinn that Mona is actually really close to death. She has been dying for a while. That's why she hasn't been communicating as much with him, not just because he's a vampire, but because she's getting sick and is about to die. And so Lestat, who, if you'll remember, has been here the whole time, he agrees to turn Mona. And that's the end of the book. This one is... Okay, you see, this one is bad. I don't like this book. But by God, does my hatred for this have nothing on the way that I feel about our next one, Blood Canticle, which came out in 2003. If you thought Blackwood Farms was incomprehensible, just wait till you hear about the Taltos. Just wait. I wrote in my notes, the bitch is back, and I cannot make that clear enough. We finally, for the first time since Memnoch the Devil, have Lestat narrating once again, and by God is he good. So he says, I want to be a saint. I want to save souls by the millions. I want to do good far and wide. I want to fight evil. I want my life-size statue in every church. I'm talking 6 feet tall, blonde hair, blue eyes. Wait a second. Do you know who I am? I'm thinking maybe you're a new reader and you've never heard of me. By God, if anyone picked up Blood Canticle as their first Vampire Chronicles book. Okay, so Lestat's back. He's talking weird though. He talks... It's just really weird in this book. He says dude, he says hey, he says yeah, he calls Mona Honey Bunch, and I know we're out of practice. Like, it's been a couple of books since we had Lestat as our narrator, but like, you remember how he talks? He also spends a good portion of this introduction claiming about the reception of Memnoch the Devil. Memnoch the Devil was really poorly received as a book, but I won't say it wasn't deserving of it. Anyway, we're back at where we cut off last time, and Mona is arriving at the Blackwood Farm with a limo full of flowers, because she's an icon and that's how she wants to die. So she goes and sets up her bed with flowers, and instead of dying, Lestat turns her. She is now the vampire Mona Mayfair, also Goblin's dead. So Lestat has been seeing the ghost of Julian and Stella Mayfair. This has very little to do with the plot, and I don't understand why it was included. I do have in my notes again, Lestat has genuinely lost it. Yeah, so this is a quote from him, and I'm gonna put up a picture of the book on screen so you know I'm not over-exaggerating the enunciation. So he says, well, think about Adam in the Bible. I mean, this guy is the wimp of all time, saying to Almighty God, the Creator, Yahweh who made the stars, this woman gave me to eat. I mean, the poor slob is just a spineless, hopeless jerk. And this is original sin, no less. The primal catastrophe. Oh, I mean, please, but... When you see a magnificent woman like you with your green eyes just the perfect distance apart, tinsel voice, giving out intelligent words, lying naked and staring with an expression of keen, unerring comprehension, you can sort of read into Adam an inevitable bafflement in the face of Eve, something that defies clarification, and that's how Adam could come up with such a ludicrous excuse. This completely weird, way out, strange, mysterious, inscrutable, seductive being with which you made out of my rib gave me to eat. Get it? No, Lestat? What are you talking about? Lestat's also just weirdly sexist in this one, but they dress Mona up, because she's a vampire now. They go out hunting on the town, and the three of them move into the house at Rue Royale, which is in New Orleans. It's close enough. It's mostly correct. Mona starts writing of her experiences as a vampire. There are multiple scenes where she comes in and reads them passages from the book that she's writing, and Lestat and Quinn are just like, yeah, no, that sounds pretty good. I don't know what the point of this book is. So she doesn't want to see Rowan. Remember from last book, Rowan, Mayfair, and Michael Curry are her guardians. She's been avoiding Rowan because obviously Rowan's going to notice something was up. She's the one doing her medical treatments. Michael arrives alone, though, and tells them that Rowan is losing it. She's like losing her mind a little bit. Then he reveals that Julian, who's the ghost that Quinn had seen and that Lestat is now seeing, had put a spell on Michael, fully grown man Michael, and 13-year-old Mona Mayfair, so that they would have sex and have a baby. And so that baby that she had that was taken away from her, that was Michael Curry's baby, and it was because Julian wanted them to have a child, the ghost of Julian. The three of them go in to calm down Rowan, and Rowan, as soon as she sees... Hang on, did I miss something? Oh, yeah. Right after Mona was turned, Rowan and Michael showed up, and Lestat was like, I'm in love with Rowan, because obligatory Lestat has to be falling in love with someone, and if it's not going to be the actual devil himself or, you know, a televangelist, it might as well be Rowan Mayfair. So they go to try and calm down Rowan. Rowan freaks out when she sees Mona, obviously, and she's like, hey, put her in her grave, because she's dead, which she is. Rowan then talks about Taltos. She describes Taltos as a mammal, evolved totally apart from Homo sapiens on a volcanic island in the North Sea thousands of years before us. We share perhaps 45% of our genes in common. The creatures look like us, except that they tend to be taller and more long of limb. Their bone structure is almost entirely what we would call cartilage. When the pure creatures mate, the female ovulates on demand and the fetus develops within a matter of minutes or hours, but whatever the case, it puts tremendous strain upon the mother. The infant unfolds as a small adult and begins to grow into maturity immediately. This is helped by the special Taltos milk, which is also massively beneficial to humans. Taltos are cartilage creatures that are like 45% human. They discuss a whole thing that happened with Lasher in other books. Taltos... Rowan, turns out Rowan also birthed a Taltos, and the thing that Mona birthed was a Taltos. So both of them had birthed Taltos. Mona wants to go and find her child, Morrigan, who's the Taltos child. But Lestat is completely preoccupied from listening to her at all, because Mona is scantily clad. She has cleavage, and as I said, Lestat is sexist in this book. So Lestat basically tells Mona to go change. He says, before I can talk to you like an adult, you need to go and change because you're too hot right now. Ew, 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 Lestat! Mona tears him a new one. She says, go on, throw me out. You know what I did last night after you left us and went away because you were oh so in love with Rowan, oh so very in love with La Doctor de la Rosa? Well, guess what? I read your books, your maudlin, mawkish, melancholy Vampire Chronicles, and I can see why your fledglings despise you. You treated Claudia like a doll just because she had the body of a child. And what was that all about, making a child vampire in the first place? Lestat says, stop it, how dare you? She says, and your own mother, you gave her the dark gift, and then you try to stop her from cutting her long hair or wearing men's clothes? And this in the 18th century, when women have to go around looking like wedding cakes. You're an autocratic monster. He says, you insult me, you abuse me if you don't stop. And she says, and I know why you're so fired up over Rowan. She's the first adult female other than your own mother who's ever caught your attention for more than 5 minutes. And hello, Lestat discovers the opposite sex. Yeah, females do come in grown-up sizes, and I happen to be one of them. This is not the Garden of Eden, and I am not taking off this dress. Yes! Okay, I don't like this book, but that part I like. It's tough because I feel like they've totally recharacterized Lestat in this book to a point where he's kind of unrecognizable. But she's right! In regards to the character that he is right now, he does have mommy issues. Anyway, okay, so he kicks Mona out because he's a child. And right after that, they're called back to Blackwood Farms. So you remember how Quinn killed his mom? That's like under investigation because her ghost has been really active. And Quinn, in all his ultimate wisdom, just keeps telling the police that he killed his mom. If you killed your mom and they believe it was a suicide and not your fault, stop telling the police that you killed your mom. Just a word of advice. Also, they've made Nash, his tutor, the gay tutor from the last book, they've made him the de facto leader of Blackwood Farm because Jasmine doesn't want to. Lestat banishes Quinn's mom's ghost, and then Lestat has been mentally messaging Maharet, and she emails back to him the location of the Taltos, because now they can just use email, which is pretty funny. Lestat is utterly baffled by the concept of email. So they fly to an island in the Caribbean. This is no longer accurate, don't look at that. It's been taken over by drug smugglers. They infiltrate the drug smuggler's house and find out that the children of Morrigan, who is Mona Mayfair's daughter, the children of Morrigan still live there, but the Taltos they meet are kind of assholes. They're really bitter and combative. They're just weird characters. Anyway, they're trying to figure out what happened. It turned out that one of the Taltos, they were living peacefully, the children of Morrigan, they were living peacefully, and then one of the Taltos started killing drug dealers on another island, and so the drug dealers came to their island and took over. They find, on this island, Morrigan and the Taltos that she'd ran off with, her Taltos husband, they find them in the freezer because the drug dealers have been trying to preserve their bodies, but they're actually dead. So they send the remaining Taltos. They kill all the drug dealers, by the way. They go on a murder spree. These three go on a murder spree and kill all the drug dealers. And so then now the Taltos are free, but they go back to live with the Mayfairs because they're doctors or whatever. And Mona, she bemoans the fact that vampires can't have websites. And Mona makes the fair point that, like, okay, so I can't have a website where I talk about my life, but you can have the Vampire Chronicles. And he's like, it's an age-old form of public confession, Lestat says. It's sacrosanct. It goes back to ancient Egypt. And she says, it sounds positively dusty to me, but I love you just the same. Now, think about this radio station idea. Maybe it's not too late. You could have your own show. And Lestat says, I will insert it here. Ah! Which is funny considering what you're gonna hear next book. Also, Mona totally forgave Lestat after going off on him. She totally loves him now and thinks he's never done anything wrong, sure. They have a funeral for Morrigan, who's Mona's daughter, the Taltos, and her husband, her partner. They have a funeral. The Taltos are, like, happy. There is a moment that I really like where when the Taltos are walking off, they say, "Come, my blessed little idiot. We'll go back to my suite and continue watching The Lord of the Rings." Lestat talks Julian's ghost into non-existence, if you remember who he is. Quinn and Mona go off to live with Maharet and learn stuff from her, and Lestat meets with Rowan Mayfair, who's like, can I be turned? And he says, no, too many people need you, you run a hospital. Did I ever tell you that about Rowan Mayfair? She runs a hospital. Too many people need you, you run a hospital. But come back to me when nobody needs you anymore, and I will turn you into a vampire. Oh my god, that is blood, Canticle. Okay, I had to take a break to cook some potatoes, but now I'm back and covered in a light sheen of water. We are on our final sub-series, and that is what I'll call the Prince Lestat trilogy, starting with The Prince Lestat, which came out in 2014. Significant gap. This was 2003, I think. This was 2014, so we got a pretty considerable gap. It also is 2013 in the story, which is just crazy because that's a year that I remember. I remember this year when Lestat was doing this thing, and it turns out that Lestat has actually been hearing a voice in his head since the events of Queen of the Damned, like 20 years ago. He just chose not to mention that to anyone. Louis, Armand, Benji, and Sybil have all been living in New York in an apartment called Trinity Gate, which is, I say it's an apartment, it is a set of 3 skyscrapers, all connected by roof bridges, where they live together in bliss. I assume the reason that Louis and Lestat, or Louis and Armand, have made up and are able to live together is because they are allowed to be in 2 separate skyscrapers with an entire skyscraper in between them so that they don't actually have to see each other all too much. And in this house in Trinity Gate, Benji has, ironically, considering what just happened in the last book, been running a radio show just for vampires. It's kind of like radio show meets podcast, and it's very cute. They like only allow vampire guests, and they talk about vampire things, like how we should all join together and befriend vampires together, and it's very cute. Lestat has been seeing doppelgangers in a mirror. He also goes and buys a bespoke axe for himself, which is a really, I would not want Lestat to have a bespoke axe, considering how he was acting in the last book. But you know, if Dr. Farid Ben Sali, who is a vampire, who is a doctor, he's working with a vampire named Seth, who's a much older vampire, and I didn't care to make a tag for him. And they're doing weird vampire medicine things together, and Seth is actually Akasha's son from back in the day. Lestat recounts how between Tale of the Body Thief and Memnoch the Devil back in the 90s, he met with Dr. Farid, and Dr. Farid gave him a special medicine that allowed him to have procreative sex, technically speaking, because vampires can't. That's a thing in this book. In these books, they don't have sex, but also can't have babies, because all of their bodily fluids are blood. Sweat, spit, all of their bodily fluids. You can surmise from there. He went to their lab and got the special hormone that allowed him to and did so with a woman, and that happened. Jesse and David meet up to talk about how Maharet is not doing so well. She's living in South America with Mekare and Cayman, and just none of them are doing really well, mentally speaking. Mekare's gone kind of comatose. She's kind of brain dead right now. And Maharet's not doing well. They're also being followed by paparazzi vampires. There's lots of young vampires just kind of around. This is another one, this is kind of in line with Queen of the Damned, where we're just skipping between POVs violently and desperately, like we are playing The Floor is Lava. Because our next POV is from Rose Fisher. Rose Fisher is a girl who apparently Lestat adopted a long time ago. I don't know. She was an orphan, and she was adopted by Lestat, who had to use a fake name in order to adopt her. And guess what that fake name was? Drum roll, please. It was Lestan. So to Rose Fisher, he is Uncle Lestan. He sent her to be raised by caretakers. She has a kind of tumultuous upbringing. At one point, she stole the family car and got sent to a troubled teen facility, which is terrible because they were absolutely abusive to her. And just before she was killed, she was saved by Louis de Pontdulac, who swept in and saved her. So Louis saves her from that abuse, and she goes to college, where in college she has an affair with her professor, and after they're together, they sit and have a conversation. Rose is like, "Can I actually open up to you about what's going on in my life?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course." So she starts talking about her uncle Lestan and his best flying friend Louis, and if you'll remember, the Vampire Chronicles books exist in universe, so the professor who's read them is like, what are you talking about? Why are you just writing fan fiction? You could have at least changed the names. The professor who's sleeping with his student, by the way, goes, "This is so disappointing. Oh, so disappointing. I had such high hopes for you, such dreams. And you give me this stupid, ridiculous, cheap high school vampire babble." Anne was definitely bitter about Twilight. And he's basically like, "Oh my god, at the very least you could get the names right." And she's like, "What?" And then he kicks her out. And she goes home and reads all the Interview with the Vampire books, the Vampire Chronicles books, and she goes, I think my Uncle Lestat might have something else going on. But just after she realizes that she is kidnapped by her professor, who nearly kills her, but she wakes up in hospital to none other than Victor de Leoncourt. That's right. When Lestat had sex back then, he had a son, a human son named Victor. And let me tell you something, I don't think the show's gonna get to the point of producing these books, because there's a lot of material to cover, and if I have to watch Blackwood Farms in TV form, it's gonna be bad news for everyone involved here. But if we get to this point in the show where we are meeting Victor de Leoncourt, and he is not played by Connor Story, you're not going to want to see the person I am when that happens. I mean, I trust the casting. I know they do a great job, but look at it. Look at father and son. They're father and son, please. For the record, If you're one of the people who likes Vampire Chronicles and you've been recommending that people who watch Heated Rivalry go on to watch Vampire Chronicles or Interview with the Vampire the show, you gotta stop. That's like someone being like, oh yeah, you want to go on an afternoon stroll and then you take them to Everest. They're both good shows, but just because they both have blonde, annoying European men in them does not make them interchangeable. So Victor is Lestat's son, and it is funny because he's an inch taller than Lestat. Looks like Lestat in every other way, but he's way nicer and is also an inch taller. And as much as Lestat will come to like him, that is something that will always piss him off a little bit, and I think that's very funny. Rose is greeted by Victor when she wakes up in the hospital, because Victor has been raised by Dr. Farid, because he was his lab baby, and they kind of fall in love immediately, so Rose and Victor are together. Cyril is an old vampire who hears a voice in his head like Lestat's been hearing and burns young vampires. Everyone's a little worried about the voice that's happening in their heads right now. Surprise of all surprises, guess who's back? It's Antoine. Antoine from the first book! And he's not had a good time of life. Lestat kind of abandoned him, and he's just been wandering despondently. He runs into Killer, who's the vampire who made Baby Jenks way back in the day. He goes to Trinity Gate looking for Lestat, but there he meets Benji and Sybil, and he plays a duet on the violin with Sybil, and Armand takes him in, so now Antoine is happy and he gets to live with them. Daniel and Marius, meanwhile, are living it up on a beach in Rio. Sure. Marius is tempted by the voice that they're all hearing to burn young vampires, but he resists. We are then introduced to Gregory Duff Collingsworth, who is one of the first vampires made, and he used to be named Nebamun, which is a really cool name, but he renamed himself Gregory Duff Collingsworth, so now he's just called Greg. We get an overview of his life story. He talks about how he gathered a small coven to him of Avacus, who was back in Blood and Gold. Yeah, Avacus was back in Blood and Gold with Mael and Zenobia, so he's hanging out with Zenobia and Flavius, who is one of the ones in Pandora's story, not relevant. A vampire named Everard de Landon has the voice influence him and kills a bunch of baby vampires. Then a couple of vampires named Tescamen. Tescamen is the vampire in the grove that originally turned Marius. His name is Tescamen, apparently. And also there is Raymond Gallant. Was he the Talamasca agent back in Blood and Gold? I think he was. I don't know how he's still alive. He's either a vampire or a ghost. There's a lot of ghosts around, including the ghost of Magnus, Lestat's maker. It's a whole thing. And they're talking about their encounters with Roshamandes, who is an old Egyptian vampire who's just really pissed off, and he has a companion named Benedict. So Tescamen, Raymond Gallant, and Magnus's ghost are talking about encounters with Roshamandes. Remember Arjun from Blood and Gold, who was Pandora's partner, who was like maybe kidnapping her but not really? He's crying because he accidentally killed a bunch of vampires because of the voice. He's comforted by a guy named Gremt Striker Knowles, and Pandora. It doesn't matter. Gremt reveals to Pandora that he's a founder of the Talamasca. Lestat meets up with David and Jesse, they have a talk, and Lestat heads for the Amazon where he knows Maharet is to talk to her. Now, Cayman is with Maharet, and did I even put him up here? I've lost him. Anyway, Cayman is having a crisis because he killed a bunch of baby vampires, because that's what the voice is getting everyone to do. And Lestat shows up, and Maharet is like, hey, go away and never come back. And so Lestat leaves. David and Lestat come and talk to each other and agree that the voice is Amel, which is the sacred core demon that first made vampires in the first place. And they kind of come to the conclusion here, or later in the story, that Amel is mad because his power is too greatly distributed over too many vampires, and that is why he is killing the baby vampires to consolidate his power in the existing vampires. So apparently that's a function of vampire technology now. Lestat goes into the Paris catacombs, where he finds Gabby, and then we flash back to David and we flash to Daniel and Marius, who meet with Tescamen, who's Marius's maker, if you remember, the guy in the grove. He's also a Talamasca founder, by the way. Just by the way. And also Hesketh, who is a ghost. So the three founders of the Talamasca are Gremt Striker Knowles, Tescamen, and Hesketh. Sure, if that means anything to you. Benedict who's Rashamandi's companion. We're now in their POV. And he is being comforted by Rashamandi's because he just killed a bunch of vampires. And Amel is going really hard at Rashamandi's, asking to be let into his psyche, which Rashamandi's is avoiding for now, although he's not completely against it. At this point, Farid, the doctor, and Seth prepare to travel with Rose and Victor, Rose is at the hospital, at Farid's hospital. They prepare to travel to Trinity Gate, where Armand, Louis, Sybil, and Benji are. Once they get there, everyone's kind of gathering at Trinity Gate at this point. Gregory Duff Collingsworth, aka Nebamun, discusses with Armand who's going to lead the vampires, and obviously they're all thinking Lestat. I think that's kind of a terrible idea, but they're all thinking Lestat. So everyone else gathers in Trinity Gate, except for Lestat and Gabrielle. Lestat and Gabrielle go to... where are they? They go to the hideout where kind of all of the hot female vampires are. For the record, I'm gonna be right here if I am in this world. Let me just say that. So they go there. Severine is there. She's an ancient vampire. Magnus's ghost is also hanging out with the girlies, which it repels me slightly, but what are you gonna do? So Lestat sees Magnus's ghost, and actually they're pretty chill with each other at this point, which doesn't feel right for Lestat's character for him to just be chill with Magnus, but who am I to critique? It is there that Lestat also learns what's happened to Rose, and he learns about the existence of Victor, his biological son. Oh, also there is Eleni, she was the one sending letters to Lestat to update him about the goings-on while he was traveling with his mom. Amel continues working on Rashamandi's and Benedict, but by proxy, because Benedict follows Rashamandi's around because they're lovers. Benedict was a monk in the medieval ages, and now he's with Rashamandi's and was turned by him. Rashamandi's is a vampire, by the way, I just forgot to give him thanks. Anyway, Amel is working on Rashamandi's, and he sends him off to the Amazon where Cayman, Maharet, and Mekare are, where he kills Cayman. Rashamandi's kills Cayman, and then he kills Maharet. It's very sad. He murders Maharet, but Maharet is already kind of considering doing it herself. Still very upsetting, and they take Mekare. They kidnap Mekare and take her back to the US. Rashamandi's doesn't kill Mekare because he doesn't know how to transfer the sacred core, and he decides the sacred core that is all vampirism, and he doesn't want to kill himself by proxy of killing Mekare, so he wants Dr. Farid's help. And so he goes to Trinity Gate where he knows everyone is gathering, and he kidnaps Victor because he knows that's the best way to get Lestat to agree with him. Lestat arrives in Trinity Gate, and obviously he is pissed that his son was just kidnapped, but everyone is now here at Trinity Gate, and you know what that means? It's conference table time, baby! So they're talking about who's gonna lead, and they also are having an argument about whether or not Amel is good. Because Marius is making the argument, like, I wouldn't call him Amel, that's far too personal. And Lestat says, I called him the voice when I didn't know who he was, and others who described him as the voice didn't know who he was. Armand says, are you saying that the spirit Amel is good? Lestat, all we ever learned from it from the twins was that it was evil. Not so, I said. That is not really what the twins told us at all. Besides, why would it be inherently good or evil? And what the twins described was a playful boasting spirit that loved Mekare and sought to punish Akasha for ever harming her. And somehow this spirit went into Akasha's body and became one with her, one with the one he hated. Lestat is basically arguing that he doesn't think Amel is outright evil. Rashamandi's arrives to negotiate, and so Lestat cuts off his arm with his fancy bespoke axe and holds the arm hostage. Victor, meanwhile, is pretty cool. He escapes on his own from where they're holding him, and Lestat then asks Marius to be the one to turn him and Rose so that they will be safe. Lestat says that he loves Amel. He's talking to the voice in his head. He says he loves Amel and will accept him willingly into him. And Mekare shows up to Lestat. And Lestat says to her, you want to go to your sister, don't you? To Mekare. Very slowly, her pink lips, so very like the pink insides of a seashell, spread into a smile. The mask-like face fired with subtle perception. She reaches into her head. This is gross. Skip forward 10 seconds if you want to avoid. She rips out her eyes and then pulls Lestat's mouth to her eye socket and has him suck her brain out. And so now Lestat has the sacred core inside of him. And Lestat says that instead of being the Prince of the Damned or whatever, he is going to be the Prince Lestat. And this is part of his larger thing about Amel not being evil, that he doesn't like accept the title of like of the damned because he doesn't think that they are damned. He doesn't think that they have to be. Victor and Rose are now vampires. Actually, that's very apt because Rose struggles with vampirism. She doesn't take to it immediately. And Lestat has to come in and ends up being her maker. Lestat agrees to meet with the Talamasca founder soon to kind of organize everything. Cyril, who was killing people in Japan a while back, is called into the tribe and made one of them. And then Louis, at the end of this book, sits and reads Interview with the Vampire again, which is so cute, and he has some very astute thoughts. He surmises the road ahead could not be smooth, and simplicity could never be the goal. The burden of conscience was a part of Louis's human heart, and the heart of every blood drinker he had ever known, even Armand, funny, and the struggle for goodness, actual goodness, would and must obsess them all. That was the miracle which now united the tribe. They're all fighting for goodness, more or less. And at the end of the book, Louis decides that he is going to go be with Lestat, no matter how complicated and problematic he is. And that is the end of the Prince Lestat. 2 more to go. We are so close to the end that I can literally taste it. Then we have 2016's Prince Lestat and the Realms of Atlantis. So 2016, Lestat has been having dreams of a city that's falling into the sea. Sure. We launch immediately to Derek, who I didn't make a card for because it would spoil things. Derek is being held prisoner by a vampire named Roland and Roshamandes. And Roshamandes is still very obviously mad at Lestat, and Arian is there, who again I bring up, even though I don't remember why I brought him up before. He is kidnapped by Petronia, who takes him off to Italy, flies him to Italy, where he's introduced to Arian. They recount the end of the previous book, and they're kind of wondering what Derek is, because they keep drinking Derek's blood and Derek keeps on not dying. But Derek won't tell them what he is, so they torture him even more, and he thinks about a place called Atlantia and the others. Now, Arian, the vampire, takes pity on Derek and brings him food, water, and an iPod, because he is merciful, and this iPod is loaded up with Benji's podcast / radio broadcast about vampires, so that Derek can kind of learn what's going on. Lestat goes to Grempt and Magnus to talk about the things that are going on with the vampire things. Also, now Cyril and Thorn are acting as his bodyguards, because he's the sacred core in him, so he has to have bodyguards, apparently. Garrican, who's a new character, recalls his very lengthy life and the time that he spent in Russia, and he investigates vampires. Garrican, not specified yet what exactly Garrican is. Garrican goes to New York, where he's approached by the vampire killer, who hung out with Antoine and made Baby Jenks a long time ago. And Garrican slaughters Killer and eats his brain, which does not exactly get him on the good list of vampires. Lestat and Louis go hunting together, which is a real romantic in my opinion. However, Lestat is kind of thinking the whole time about whether or not Amel, who he's been hearing in his head a lot because Amel literally is in his head, whether or not Amel is speaking through Louis, and if it's not really Louis but actually Amel. Meanwhile, Dr. Farid and Gregory Duff Collingsworth owns a pharmaceutical company, by the way. They get together to talk about one of the scientists that Dr. Farid was working with, who apparently was faking her identity. And that's weird. And then Garrican, who's the one who just ate Killer's brains, is captured, bound by the people at Trinity Gate. And, hang on, he escapes and attacks Eleni, which isn't a great look for him in terms of being suspicious. So they gather together. I think they're in France. Yeah, because Lestat restored his family's chateau. So they gather together, and it's conference table time. They discuss Amel and Garrican and the Atlantia dreams that they're all having, because they think they might be interconnected. Roshamandes has taken Derek to the Outer Hebrides, where he has a castle, and he is trying to torture Derek. So he takes Derek and is torturing him, and just like Lestat did to him last book, he cuts off Derek's arm. Arian gets him to not destroy the arm, so the arm is sitting next to Derek, and he wakes up in the middle of the night to discover, and there's no easy way to say this, that the arm stump has grown a mouth and has crawled over to Derek's breast and is now suckling from it. So he wakes up and discovers that his arm has grown into a fully fledged son, a version of him that is exactly the same as him. And then Derek goes back and thinks about his creation by the parents, as he refers to them. His son escapes during the day and then comes back when the vampires are all asleep or whatever, to clothe himself so that they can both escape. And they're sitting there discussing, well, what should Derek's son name be? Because Derek is his God-given name. That is his actual name. He says, I suggest my name be Derek 2, pronounced as one word and spelt as such. Derek 2. No, said Derek, you're not as clever as you think you are. And Derek 2 says, the second Derek says, give me a name. And Derek says, Derek 2 will sound and will look absurd. They're talking about things. And then he says, shorten your name to Dur2, Derek said. That's plenty good enough. And it sounds fairly normal. Dur2? Dur2? So they escape, Dur2 and Derek, and they get on the broadcast on Benji's podcast, on his radio show, and they broadcast in their secret language a message to the others of their kind through the secret language. And of course, unsurprisingly, it is conference table time again. Where the vampires, I'm regretting this bit, the vampires are here to talk about the message that they just accidentally broadcasted, and to invite these strange creatures to the chateau to come and see them. Rashomandis is in a rage. He is not happy about this whole thing that his Derek escaped. And then Arian shows up and tells Lestat that Mona and Quinn died. And we wept. We were all so sad. We were so sad to see them go, honestly, but they're gone now, so that's cool. Derek meets up with the others of his kind, which include Garrican, Wealth, and Capetria. Why did all of them get such cool names except Derek? Why is Derek just a guy's name? Either way, they get together to talk about Dur2, and then they all make their own copies of themselves that they name Ka2, Wealth2, and Ger2. So eventually, they make their way to the chateau. And it's conference table time again. Because it's time for the Replomoid life story. Okay, so the Replomoids were first created 12,000 years ago by the parents on a planet called Bravenna. And they lived on it was pretty good on Bravenna. They were just sitting there learning things via live streams from Earth. Now there's one thing about the parents, who are the aliens. They're like birds. They're bird-like aliens. They hate mammals. They describe Earth's history as saying, Earth suffered a calamity. Millions of years ago, its atmosphere was poisoned by a large asteroid that struck the planet, resulting in darkness and coldness that killed its abundant life. As the result of that, the mammals of this planet arose and made the life you have come to know, a life of endless struggle, violence, and misery. So most of the live streams that they get from Earth are of people dying and being miserable and killing each other and stuff. So they think Earth is a kind of miserable place compared to Bravenna, which is really perfect. And the bird-like aliens, because they are bird-like, apparently resent the destruction of the dinosaurs and the rise of mammals. They find out that they are being sent to Earth to destroy mammalian humans, because the bird-like aliens hate them, the parents hate them, so they are to infiltrate Earth and then blow themselves up, which will then blow up the rest of the Earth because they're filled with toxic chemicals. Now, Derek protests that he doesn't want to die, but then they find out that there was a guy named Amel who was sent there before them and is of a similar species to them. They're Replomoids, by the way, you should figure that out. Amel was sent there, one of the first ones sent there, and he went rogue and made Atlantia, which is a city that the parents cannot see into and cannot get live streams out of, so they're pretty pissed about that. So the Replomoids go down to Earth, where they unfortunately find out that humans are pretty chill. They actually really like it on Earth, and they really like people, and they go to Atlantia, and they find out that it's great there too! It's a utopia that is entirely made possible by a magical plastic substance called Luricastria. and Amel is the one who is able to wield Luricastria, and it has created this magical city. They go and meet with Amel, who tells them that he was once actually human, but he was taken by the parents and transformed into semi-replomoid creature and then put back on Earth. And he has realized that when he was sent to Earth to clean up the transmission stations that they had put on Earth to do the live stream and to build new ones, he realized that these transmission stations were not just taking video up to Bravenna, they were broadcasting human misery specifically, and somehow the parents feed off of that misery. And that is their life force, and so they have impetus to make humans as miserable as possible, because then they get more food. And they actually theorize that God was invented as a way to glorify suffering so that they could justify it, so that the parents could generate more suffering. Sure. The Replomoids come around on this and they're like, Amel, we think you're actually right. So they agree to help him out. It is at this point that Bravenna, with the parents on it, explodes for reasons unspecified, and the falling shards of Bravenna destroy Atlantia. And the Replomoids go into a deep sleep in various places in the earth and then wake up at various times through history, which is why they're split up. So this means, if you're tracking with me, that Amel is actually not a demon, but he's an alien, technically speaking. There's a lot of people that have a problem with the fact that they made Amel an alien instead of a demon. I'll be honest, that's not even the thing I'm most upset about. I think I'm still mad about Taltos just existing. The vampires, upon hearing this, Amel freaks out because he's like, oh my god, it's my real history, that's crazy. And he sends basically a migraine to every vampire, a crippling migraine. And Amel tells Capetria, who's been looking for this, Capetria is one of the Replomoids, he tells Capetria that the formula for Luricastria, the magic plastic that made Atlantia possible, is inside of herself. It is within her body. He remembers enough to know that the formula to Luricastria is within her own cells. Sure. The vampires then capture Roshamandes and Roland, and they execute Roland for his crimes against Derek, and they make Roshamandes apologize. And now it is time for conference table again. Really, there's a lot of ribbons on my floor. So Amel has Lestat write a note in the Replomoid language, demanding that they don't hurt the vampires. So he is communicating directly to his people, the Replomoids, and saying, hey, I like the vampires, please don't do anything really messed up to them. And so the Replomoids leave, but Amel calls Capetria all the time on Lestat's cell phone, which he hates, by the way, he hates his iPhone. But Amel likes it because he can call up Capetria when Lestat is sleeping to talk to her about various things. Louis admits that when everyone got hit with that big brainwave from Amel, he was not hit by it. And that is really interesting because if you remember correctly, at the end of Merrick, he died. He was turned into complete ash. His heart was stopped for a long time. At that point, he was severed from the core. That's our working theory. That's Louis' working theory. And they test it because Dr. Farid stops his own heart. And then when Amel sends out his next wave of brain pain, Dr. Farid is not hit by it. So they conclude that if they stop Lestat's heart, that should sever him and everyone from the core if they stop his heart and then bring it back. So that's the plan, they're gonna do that, and Capetria keeps calling because she's really pissed that she's not involved in this process, but they're like, no, we have to do this ourselves. So they stop Lestat's heart and they bring him back to life, and it works! It is concluded that the vampires also have Luricastria in them. You remember when Akasha drank Enkiel and he turned into a shell, like a plastic shell? That's because he had turned largely into Luricastria. As they get older, their skin gets harder and more marble-like, and paler usually, and that is them slowly turning into Luricastria, and the Luricastria taking over. So, vampire's plastic? Anyway, Lestat is the only person who can still hear Amel's voice, which means that it didn't totally work, but all the other vampires are disconnected. So Lestat finally agrees to meet with Capetria, the Replomoid leader, where she pulls one over on him and he wakes up in an operating room to find that Amel is gone! She did something that severed him from Lestat's brain. Sure. And he's sad about this because he misses Amel, but it is really romantic because after this, Louis and Lestat are often seen together in Paris, hanging out and stuff, and it is one time while they are in Paris, he sees someone across the way, and he realizes it's Amel. And Amel is just, the body that he's in looks exactly like Lestat, except it has red hair. And so it turns out that Capetria had figured out how to get Amel his own body, and that's why she had kidnapped Lestat and operated on him without his permission. Lestat and Amel talk to each other, they drink from each other, and express their love. Amel's good now, and he's nice. And Lestat says of Amel, he walks the earth with the power to destroy it, but then so does the human race, and so do we. But what endures is what has always mattered, love. That we love one another as surely as we are alive. And if there is any hope for us to ever be really good, that hope will be realized through love. To love any one person or thing truly is the beginning of wisdom, to love all things. This has to be so, it has to be. I believe it, and I don't really believe anything else. So that is Prince Lestat and the Realms of Atlantis. It's one of the weirder ones, but it's definitely not my least favorite. You guys know what my least favorites ones are. I mean, is it weird? Yeah. When were these books ever not weird? Number 13, Blood Communion. It's technically Blood Communion, a Prince Lestat tale. Lestat, if there's one thing that he's gonna do, it is he's gonna introduce himself again. And you know what? I will say this is a blessedly short book compared to the last 400 chapter beasts. So he introduces himself. I'm the Vampire Lestat. I'm 6 feet tall, have blue-gray eyes that sometimes appear violet, and a lean, athletic build. My hair is blonde and thick and hangs to my shoulders, and over the years it has become lighter so that at times it seems pure white. I've been alive on this earth for more than 250 years. I am truly immortal, having survived any number of assaults on my personhood, and my own suicidal recklessness, only becoming stronger as the result. He's the hottest guy alive. I love him. Lestat is now Prince Lestat, and he's in charge of everyone, and he's a little insecure about it. And Marius gives him a lecture wherein he says, you've forgotten that we are by nature killers. You've forgotten that what makes us distinct from human beings, and what always will, is that we hunt human beings and we love killing them. You're trying to make us into darkling angels. So the thing Lestat is wrestling with within this book, is that he really wants vampires to be good, and they're just not. Vampires are acting up in New Orleans, and Lestat has to go take care of them. So he takes Cyril and Thorn, his bodyguards, to New Orleans, where he meets a brand new vampire, because let's introduce a new vampire in this last book. He's named Fontaine. Dimitri Fontaine. He's an old fledgling of Pandora, but he's not living with Pandora because her fledgling Arjun was really jealous of him. He also learns that an old vampire named Bodwin, new vampire, is mad at him for creating the vampire court, pretty much. Eleni calls Lestat to say that Marius has just killed... Hang on. I'm not trying to drag this out, I just can't find Marius. Marius has killed Arjun, Pandora's somewhat problematic fledgling. So Lestat returns to the chateau where he and so many vampires are living, where he waxes poetic about the head architect that he has, whose name is Elaine, and his assistant Barbara. I love Barbara. I'm mad that Anne Rice was introducing new vampires in this book because it's so late in the series and there's so many characters, if you couldn't tell. But Barbara is one that I like. She's a vampire from the Midwest. She's a middle-aged lady, and she runs Lestat's court like it is the army. And when they find a dungeon in the base of the chateau, she's the one who's like, no, we absolutely need to have a dungeon. Barbara, you can be a My Coven. My Coven that consists of Armand, Bianca, Pandora, and Victor can be in there, but mostly Barbara. So it turns out that Arjun had attacked Marius over Pandora, and Marius had killed Pandora for his honor. But to figure this out, it's time for conference table time. They have a discussion, and also Capetria and Amel show up for this discussion, which I think is pretty funny. And they have a discussion over what should the punishment be, because Marius did technically break the rules here, but also, like, he was provoked and attacked, so should he be blamed for killing a guy? It's debatable. Marius is actually the one out of all of them who's gunning to be killed. He's like, I should be punished, I should be taken out, whatever. Even though Pandora forgives him and Lestat pardons him, he's still kind of bitter that he wasn't, like, properly punished in his eyes. And then they bring up Rashomandis, who's been harassing the Replomoids and generally just being a problem since last book. And Lestat is pissed because he doesn't want to kill Rashomandis. He's like, he's a small fry. I just don't care. So Lestat goes back to New Orleans to get Fontaine. You remember Dimitri Fontaine, who told him about Baldwin. And he realizes that Fontaine is not alone. A trap has been set for him. Baldwin is there, and the house gets set on fire. Lestat, Thorne, and Fontaine manage to escape and fly back to the chateau. And then they find out that Baldwin was made by Gundesanth, who's an ancient vampire from a long time ago. Cyril, who's one of the bodyguards who stayed behind in New Orleans when they just fled, actually caught Baldwin and wrapped him up in an iron fence, which apparently stops his powers from working. And I can't tell you how it feels. At book 13, to be hit with new vampire lore rules. What? Lestat has a dream then of Nebumun, Gregory, and I don't have him on the board, Nebumun and Gundesanth, the old vampire who made Baldwin, meeting up long ago, and Nebumun saying he's struggling with living. So we get the impression that Gundesanth is not a bad guy, probably, at least not in the same way that Rashomandis has gone off the deep end. Benedict, who used to be Rashomandi's companion, makes Lestat a throne, just for his own ego, and then gathers everyone together to announce that he is going to be ending his life. Publicly, in front of all of them. And Armand is not particularly happy about that. He literally says to him, "Oh, die and get on with it. Do you want my help?" And Benedict says, "Yes, I do." Armand is mad because he helped kill Maharet. Benedict makes the argument that she was already kind of giving into despair, and Armand says she had her moments of suicidal despair, as we all do, that's all. She would have come around. Why didn't you and your master talk to her, seek to comfort her, seek to turn her from darkness? He says she would not have let us kill her if she had wanted to live. Which, like, obviously, Benedict isn't really trying to make a moral argument here. He is going to end his life anyway, but Armand is not particularly happy with him. Armand is pretty discontent in this book. Anyway, Benedict ends his life. He allows himself to be consumed by the youths of the clan in a great blood sacrifice, and then he is burned so that he's really gone. At this point, Rashomandis shows up and takes Gabrielle from the court. They all go into hiding, but then the next day he comes back and he takes Louis, and he also takes, I can never find him, Marius, which for some reason Marius is the final straw out of the three of those where Lestat is like, I actually need to go do something about this. So he agrees to meet with Rashomandis. Rashomandis flies him off to an island, and Lestat does this whole act where he pretends to be weak and pretends to be crying boo-hoo-hoo about the whole thing. And then when Rashomandis gets close to him, he headbutts him, rips his eyes out, and then swallows them whole. And then he drinks the blood out of Rashomandis' skull. He eats his brain. Skip forward 10 seconds if you're easily grossed out. He eats his brain, sucks the blood out of it, and then spits out the pulp, which is what I do with oranges on the reg. He decapitates Rashomandis, flies back to the court with the body, and he allows the young ones to finish his blood in another great, terrible ceremony, and Gregory declares him the Lord of the Blood Communion. Hence the title. Now, the crowd is then demanding that Baldwin be brought out, who's the one who's wrapped in iron in the dungeon, if you'll remember. And Gundesanth, it turns out, is there. So Gundesanth stands before the court and declares, "Such a place as this has never existed before in all our long bloody history. Never such a place as this. Free of all mythologies of dead gods and lexicons of evil and demons invented by aggrieved souls, this is a place existing only for the benefit of us all gathered here, and all the lost blood drinkers of the world who will come to be one with us. Hail the prince, hail the court, hail a new revelation. Not from the blind stars or oracles of madness, but a revelation that comes to us out of our minds and souls, wed as they are to flesh, living flesh. A revelation rising out of our pain and our thirst and our hearts." So Gundesanth is actually totally on board with everything Lestat's doing, and he kills Baldwin himself. Crisis entirely averted. He goes and talks to Armand, then, who's been sulking because he's of the opinion that he should have killed Rosh a long time ago, Rashomandis. They have a conversation where Armand says to Lestat, "Fool, I have always loved you. I have loved you more than any being in all the world whom I've ever loved. I've loved you more than Louis. I've loved you more than Marius. And you have never given me your love. I would be your most faithful counselor if you allowed it, but you don't. Your eyes pass over me as if I don't exist. And so they always have. I hate you as much as I have ever loved you," he said. Oh, that's devastating. He says, "I hate you. I think I understand the very definition of hate when I think of you. You who humiliated me and destroyed my world. You who later told me with such relish how you shattered my coven, my little coven of holy purpose. Yet I still don't want for you to die, and I should have known that you wouldn't. He says, I love you still. Yes, even now I love you, as they all love you. I think that's one of the reasons I like Armand, is that, like, he's one of the only ones willing to express his absolute hatred for Lestat. And I love Lestat so much, but I do also hate him. I'm very much with Armand in that vein. So they have that conversation. At this point, Lestat's like, I wish that everyone who I loved wasn't dead. So he goes and finds, believe it or not, they're not actually dead, Marius, Louis, I don't want to put Marius closer, okay, and Gabby. He goes and finds them. They're off in a chapel buried in the ground in iron coffins, and their necks are broken, and they just turn their necks around and they're totally fine. And then it's time for a party. It's time for the winter solstice ball at the Vampire Chateau. And so they're all gearing up. They filled up the dungeon with evildoers so that they can all drink. The implications of that are dark if we think about it, but we're not going to. They're just going to do that for the rest of time, apparently. And Marius unveils that he has a new painting. He has painted the roof of the ballroom with every single vampire, and all the ones that I have on the floor over here, every vampire that they've ever mentioned is standing there holding hands, and Anne takes like 6 pages to explore it in incredible detail. And it's genuinely one of the more satisfying moments of these books, just because, like, oh my god, yeah, of course we're gonna get a description of their beautiful hair and their lovely outfits and who they're holding hands with and stuff all around the roof. I honestly really like this part, and Lestat has a lovely reflection when he looks out on his court. It was not the imitation of mortal life I'd once achieved with Louis and Claudia in our little townhouse in the French Quarter of New Orleans. It was a different kind of life. Our life, defined by how we wanted to dress, to speak, to be together. And mortal life had nothing to do with it. I love that they've come around to this idea of, like, it's not pretending to be human, because assimilating to human culture was never going to work for them, assimilating to mortal culture. Instead, they form their own culture, and it is way more beautiful than it ever could have been. So they get together for the dance. Gabrielle dresses up for Lestat in proper court dress, which I feel bad for Gabby, but Lestat is so pleased to see her in a pretty dress with her hair all done. Lestat and Louis also, for the very first time ever, discuss Nicholas L'Enfant, Lestat's first love. First time they're ever discussing it, but sure, whatever. And then Marius gets in front of the court and praises Lestat for his selflessness, and he says that Lestat did something that no blood drinker in the history of our tribe has ever done. He went without a second thought and offered his life up for the court. He offered to die so that the court might continue. So this act of self-sacrifice was truly what makes Lestat so special. And then it ends as such, with the ball going on around them. I knew now that I could be the monarch my people wanted, because they were indeed my people, my tribe, my family. And whatever happened hereafter wouldn't just be my story. No, it will be the story of us all. The end. It's been like 7 hours. I did a ranking of what my favorite books are. And my top favorite is Interview with the Vampire. I do think it's just the best written out of all of the books. The plot is the most structurally sound. The characters, although I like Lestat I like Lestat from here to here better than I like Lestat in the first book, obviously. And Louis' character was kind of abandoned in later books, and he's not as rich as he is in the first book. But between Louis, Claudia, and Armand, she really did something special. So Interview with the Vampire is my favorite. My second favorite is the Vampire Armand. Who's surprised? Who's surprised? I also just genuinely think it's a really beautifully written book. The plot is not quite as strong, but I think the prose can very well match Interview with the Vampire, and her themes are very, very well delivered. My number 3 is for sure the Vampire Lestat. It's kind of Lestat at his Lestatiest. His origin story and just seeing how he got the way he is very fun. Number 4, I'd say Queen of the Damned. Queen of the Damned isn't the tightest book, but it is the most, like, action and epic forward. That wasn't English, but you get what I mean. I like Queen of the Damned. Next up, maybe controversial, I gotta say Memnoch the Devil. I like it. I think it's fun getting like Anne Rice's version of the Bible. It's kind of cool, but maybe I'm just a nerd. Blood and Gold, I hate to say, is probably next. You know I don't like Marius. You know I don't like Marius. But Armand is in this, Pandora's in this, and there's some really delicious moments of Bianca in this. So Blood and Gold next. Then Tale of the Body Thief. This one has some seriously problematic things in it, but I really like Lestat getting what he deserves in terms of consequences for his actions. So that one's a good one for me. I think that Prince Lestat in the Realms of Atlantis is next, because I know it's like not a good book and it's crazy and the Replomoids are zany and stuff, but I think they're fun. I think they're fun, and I think it's when Anne kind of looped back around to like, it's like Taltos, but way better, you know? I like this one. Then it's Merrick. I don't love Merrick, but I like Merrick the character. I don't like David Talbot. So I mean, Merrick is next. Prince Lestat is definitely next. It's kind of the last one that feels very much like Queen of the Damned, but just not quite as good. And Lestat is kind of starting to come back into his character, so I like that. Then Blood Communion. Blood Communion is short, but it is a really sweet end. And then, of course, Blackwood Farms. You know how I feel about this book. And Blood Canticle is just a mess. Blood Canticle should not have been a book. Maybe it's just because I haven't read The Witches, but I really... Blood Canticle. Let me know what your ranking is down below. Even if you haven't read them, just based off of the description, let me know what you vibe with the best. I don't know how many of you got to the end of this video or survived this long. I hope that this was educational. I want to be clear, I don't think any of these books are like bad, except maybe. I think they're all just such a different adventure. And one of the things that I'm really excited for in the AMC show is just how much they are knitting together this story, because the Book of Interview with the Vampire is so tonally different from, I think, what I think is the best part of the series, kind of around this range. Lestat's character really comes into his own, and they bring the character of Lestat from these books into the first book through the show in a really, really beautiful way. So while I know it goes totally off the rails later, I think there was kind of a golden era right around here where they were just she was telling some really, really good stories. This is my love letter to Interview with the Vampire and the Vampire Chronicles. I feel like I've been hit by a truck. Go ahead and let me know in the comments what you thought, if you've read any of these books, or if you didn't know anything about these books going into this video, let me know what you think now that I've done this to you. Or your favorite character, I don't know. I will never be repelled from being an Armand girl. Oh! I forgot to say that Armand gives Claudia a head transplant. I don't want to come across as an Armand apologist who doesn't accept the worst things he's done. It was really messed up when he gave Claudia that head transplant before he killed her. But I still really like him. And I mean, as you've seen, it's not like any of these guys are getting off scot-free, so what are you gonna do? Feel free to subscribe. I don't usually make content like this on my conspiracy board, but I do make videos about the art of storytelling, things like The Lord of the Rings, and the other stuff that I like to talk about, and I'd love to have you join me. Be sure to send this video to a friend who you want to torture with knowledge of the Taltos. I hope that you are tuned in and ready for season 3 of this show, because God knows that I am. I hope this was good preparation for that, and I'll see you when season 3 comes out, because I'm going to be insufferable in my online presence and in real life. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity, vampire-y day.